Chapter 200. Because the Li royal family of Chang and dominated the world, and because of the Westhill Divine Palace, the countries in the Central Plains and the Tang Empire had never been on good terms. Although they were afraid of the Tang Empire's military strength and did not dare to slight it, they did not have a good impression of it. Only the Great River Kingdom was an exception. The Great River Kingdom, located in the south of the mainland, was separated from the Tang Empire by the Great Lake Forest and the vast territory of the South Jin Kingdom. It was extremely difficult for them to communicate with each other. However, it was not known if it was because distance could easily produce beauty. Since many years ago, the emperor and the people of the Great River Kingdom had always admired the Tang Empire's culture. They ignored the difficult and long traffic road and would send envoys and students every once in a while. The scenery and culture of Chang was extremely popular in the Great River Kingdom. The influence of the Tang Empire could be seen in many details of the imperial court's official system and the daily life of the people. The group of boys and girls who appeared by the dense forest beside the blue lake wore light-colored open skirts with wide and gorgeous belts. It was the most popular style of clothing in the Tang Empire. These boys and girls looked calm and gentle, but their eyes were focused and firm. The black sheathed wooden swords on their waists were long and slightly curved, which was the unique Xiao sword of the Great River Kingdom. From these details, Ning Ke quickly concluded that they were from the Great River Kingdom. The people of the two countries, who had been on good terms for generations, had a natural sense of closeness and trust towards each other. They did not believe that the other party would have malice towards him, so he did not hesitate to put down the bow and arrow in his hand. As he expected, when the group of boys and girls knew that he was from the Tang Empire, they quickly showed their kindness and reported their sections. The Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom was the cultivation residence of the Master of Calligrapher, Lord Wang. These boys and girls who appeared in the wilderness of the north of Yan Kingdom were naturally the disciples of the Master of Calligrapher. Most of them were female, and only 3 or 4 were male. The girl who was previously aimed at by Ning Ke with the boxwood bow came forward. She looked at Ning Ke with big curious eyes, as if she had seen something interesting. She asked, "Are you really a Tang?" The girl in a pale pink dress, probably because she was afraid of the cold, wore a furry scarf around her face and neck. With her young face and big bright eyes, she looked particularly cute. Ning Ke replied with a smile, "What's the benefit of pretending to be a Tang?" The girl covered her mouth and smiled. She said, "Except for the Tang merchants in the city, I haven't seen any Tangs from Chang and city, so I'm a little curious." A woman in her 20s came forward and bowed to Ning Ke apologetically. She took out an identity document issued by the military ministry of Yan Kingdom and asked Ning Ke to take out his own identity document. After all, this was the wilderness, not far from the battlefield. He could not let his guard down just because of Ning Ke's words. He understood Ning Ke's cautiousness very well. He took off his backpack, took out the document issued by Tuyang City and handed it to Ning Quebec. After confirming that Ning Ke was a Tang, these disciples from the Great River Kingdom's Black Ink Garden suddenly became more relaxed. Those girls looked at him from afar and discussed curiously. The woman sincerely apologized and said, "I didn't know who you were and pointed at you with swords and arrows. It's really rude. Please forgive me." Girls in the Tang Kingdom were known for being straightforward and shrewd. Both Li Yu and Situelan had this kind of character. Ning Ke rarely saw such gentle girls. He glanced at the Black Ink Garden male disciples standing in the distance and thought of the rumor that the Great River Kingdom valued girls more than boys. He could not help but feel a little strange. Since the Great River Kingdom valued girls more than boys, why were these Black Ink Garden female disciples so reasonable and gentle, or even a little too gentle? He smiled and shook his head. "You're too polite. This hot spring was discovered by you first. I'm the uninvited guest. If someone needs to apologize, it should be me." The woman in her 20s hesitated for a moment and said, "You're really a person from the Tang Kingdom. You're gentle and generous." "I'm Zhuo Jihua, the 3rd disciple of the Black Ink Garden. If you like this hot spring, why don't?" If it was an ordinary soldier of the Tang Kingdom, the third disciple of the Black Ink Garden would not be so gentle. But this place was not far from Dongxing Stockade Village. The black gown worn by Ning Ke was a farewell gift from Mistress Jian of the House of Red Sleeves. Both the material and the embroidery were first-class skills in the world. How could the women of the Great River Kingdom not understand the clothes of the Tang Kingdom? Just by a glance, they guessed that Ning Ke must have an extraordinary background. Maybe he was one of those academy students who were heard to practice in Dongxing Stockade Village. So their attitude became more gentle and humble. How could it be so? Ning Ke said with a smile, I just walked along the lake casually. Occasionally, I found the lake flow was different and guessed that there might be a mountain stream here. I didn't expect it to be a hot spring in advance. You don't need to care about me. Listening to this, the woman's expression was still calm, but she was relieved in her heart. With the respect of the Great River Kingdom to the Tang Kingdom, especially after guessing that Ning Ke might have an extraordinary background, she would probably leave with her junior sisters and brothers directly and give this hot spring to Ning Ke at other times. But now it was very inconvenient. If that's the case, I won't disturb your quiet cultivation. Zhuo Zhihua saw that he didn't intend to introduce himself, so she didn't take the liberty to ask. She said with a smile and bowed respectfully. Then she led the group of boys and girls into the dense forest. Ning Ke looked at the depths of the dense forest and vaguely saw the steam coming from the hot spring. There was also a yellow cloth circle about 1.5 man's height. He thought that the girls of the Great River Kingdom were probably soaking in the hot spring behind that group of cloth circle. No wonder they were so nervous before. If they let other men steal all the spring scenery with their eyes, what should they do? He didn't expect to meet the female disciples of the Great River Kingdom of the Black Ink Garden while walking along the lake. It seemed that today's luck wasn't too bad. He picked up the luggage on the ground, turned around and walked from where he came from. He thought that the scenery of a shallow pool seeping out of a white stone by the lake was not bad, so he planned to meditate and cultivate there. At this moment, there was a sudden sound of footsteps behind him. He turned around curiously. The girl from the Great River Kingdom who had been targeted by his bow and arrow ran over. Because she ran too fast, her tender little face was full of blush, and the furry beast tail on her neck had already spread out, which made her look even more adorable. Ning Ke asked, "What's the matter?" The girl opened her big black eyes and stared at Ning Ke's cheeks full of gentle expression. Thinking of the calm and indifferent archer just now, she subconsciously scratched her head and asked, "Can you tell me why you aimed at me with a bow and arrow when we came out of the forest together with so many senior brothers and senior sisters? If I say to catch the bandits, first catch the ringleader, will you believe me?" Ning Ke replied with a smile. The girl giggled and shook her head. "Of course not. There are so many disciples in the Black Ink Garden, but I have always been the weakest one. And at that time, I didn't have any weapons in my hand. Senior brothers had bows and arrows in their hands, and senior sisters wore show swords on their waists. You are so strong, so of course you won't regard me as the most threatening one." Ning Ke didn't expect that she could think of so many things from that aiming. After a slight shock, he honestly replied, "The reason why I aimed at you was indeed because you were the weakest one in the crowd." Then he added an explanation. "If you can't target the most important person among the enemies, then you should target the one who is the most vulnerable to attack. Then it will be easier to negotiate later." The girl looked at him curiously and asked, "If there was really a misunderstanding at that time, would you really shoot me?" There was no resentment, no anger, just pure curiosity. Ning Ke nodded. The girl's dark eyes revealed a surprised emotion. She said, "But will the Tangs also bully the weak? We Tangs are also ordinary people. There are good people and bad people." The girl was puzzled and asked, "But you are not a bad person." Looking at the cute girl who was like a cub, Ning Ke couldn't help but reach out and rub her head. He said with a smile, "There is no such thing as good people and bad people on the battlefield, only the dead and the living." After a pause, he looked at her slightly red and tender face. He didn't know if he was affected by those memories, but the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He said seriously, on the battlefield, either you kill the enemy or the enemy kills you. Little girl, if you don't want to die here, you must remember this. The girl nodded hard. You chased me just to ask these things? Ning Ke asked. Yes. The girl smiled like a blooming lotus and blushed slightly. I also want to tell you that my name is Cat Girl. After saying this, she turned around and ran in the direction of the hot spring mountain stream without looking back. Ning Ke looked at the girl's back and couldn't help laughing. He thought that the names of people from the Great River Kingdom were always very interesting, but he really didn't expect that there would be someone called Cat Girl. This name was really not good, but it was really a good match with the girl's curious eyes and fluffy cuteness. Not long after walking back along the lakeside, he saw a pool seeping out of the white stones on the low shore. The rock layer at the bottom of the clear pool was as clear as a book page. The scenery was good. After making sure that it was far enough and he wouldn't be misunderstood by those girls from the Great River Kingdom behind the yellow cloth, he untied his luggage and sat down. There was still a faint smell of sulfur in the air by the lake. Thinking that the mountain stream was actually a hot spring, and there was no way to drink it, he finally understood why neither the tribes in the wilderness or the allied forces of the Yen Kingdom chose to camp near this place. The girls from the Great River Kingdom really loved to soak in hot springs as described in the novels. Looking back at the corner of the yellow cloth that was faintly visible in the distance, his right hand fell on the round stone and subconsciously grasped it. This action didn't have any obscene meaning, but he was just recalling the feeling when he rubbed Cat Girl's head. After a while, he realized that it was because he hadn't rubbed Sung Song's head for a long time. The scenery around the rock pool was quite beautiful, quiet and pleasant. More importantly, the chi of heaven and earth was abundant. Since there was no way to jump into the mountain stream and bathe with the girls from the Great River Kingdom, Ning Ke naturally didn't want to give up such a good place for cultivation. The next day, he rode the big black horse to the lakeside again. Sitting in the lake wind, he closed his eyes and meditated quietly. When he opened his eyes, he raised his fingers and gently drew obscure lines in the wind. Only he himself knew that these lines combined to form Fu characters. His eyes moved along with his fingertips in the empty air. When he encountered a difficult juncture, he frowned and thought for a long time. He waved his hand to erase all the Fu characters in his mind, and then continued to draw invisible Fu characters with his fingers. Unconsciously, the sun moved to the middle of the sky, and the slightly cold wind was a little warmer. He untied the collar of his coat, stood up and stretched, loosening his stiff body and slightly sore arms. It was a lazy stretch, and a comfortable stretch. His eyes naturally drifted to the front right, and fell on the yellow cloth that was faintly visible in the distant forest stream. Perhaps it was the nature of his body, or perhaps it was the nature of his mind. Anyway, when he looked over there, he even heard the splashing of the stream and the silver bell-like laughter. The girls from the Great River Kingdom really loved to soak in hot springs. He sighed again, thinking that soaking in the hot springs yesterday, today, and every day, even the smoothest and whitest skin would be soaked into a wet white paper. Wouldn't those girls worry about it? Outside the forest stream, several male disciples of the Black Ink Garden vigilantly stood guard, which further proved the rumor that the Great River Kingdom valued women more than men. Ning Ke couldn't help but think that the former monarch of the Great River Kingdom was a queen. It was said that a woman once disguised as a man and flew to Chang and city to study, and had some ambiguous stories with the former emperor of the Tang Empire. If the queen had not only had one son, if not for the master of calligrapher, the status of men in the Great River Kingdom would be even more miserable. The hot spring soup was like sheep's milk, and the girls playing like fawns. Such imagination could not fill his stomach after all. Ning Ke walked away from the stone pool and found a dry place to start cooking. He was going to stew a pot of milky white mutton soup today. Can you still cook? Cat Girl appeared by the lake and curiously looked at Ning Ke, who was lighting the fire with her big eyes. She said, I heard that men in the Tang Empire don't cook and only eat ready-made food. Ning Ke had long known that she had come. Without raising his head, he said, when I was in Chang'an, I naturally didn't know how to cook. But in this wilderness, there is no other way but to cook by myself. Cat girl clapped her hands and turned her dark eyes. She squatted beside him and bravely said, let me help. Ning Ke saw her face full of hope. Although he didn't trust the cooking skills of this girl from the Great River Kingdom, he still smiled and gave way to her. To his surprise, Cat Girl's cooking skills were extremely skillful at such a young age. It only took her a while to finish all the procedures. Then she washed her hands and waited for the final opening of the pot. Listening to the sound of the boiling soup in the pot and smelling the fragrance of the meat that had begun to overflow, Ning Ke looked at her in surprise. He increasingly didn't understand what kind of existence the women in the Great River Kingdom were. In a society that valued women more than men, how could they have such gentle temperament and skillful cooking skills? Ning Ke opened the lid and handed a bowl of soup to Cat Girl. Cat Girl smiled. The two sat by the lake in the cold wind and began to drink the slightly hot soup. Both their bodies and souls became warm. Is the Great River Kingdom very warm? Yes. Cat Girl nodded. Looking at the thin ice on the lake, she shivered and said, I didn't expect the Yen Kingdom to be so cold. The cotton-padded clothes I bought on the way in West Hill seemed to be completely unable to withstand the wind. In a few days, when the real winter comes, or when you enter the real depths of the wilderness, you will know what a knife-like wind is. Speaking of which, you are so young. Why did you follow senior sisters to the front? I am 14 this year. Cat Girl opened her big eyes and looked at him in confusion. She asked, still young? Is 14 not young? Cat Girl frowned slightly and pouted. She said, you can get married at 14. How can you be young? It seemed that the law of the Tang Empire stated that one could only get married at the age of 16. Ning Ke held the soup bowl and looked at the slowly rising hot mist on the lake. He thought that Sang Sang was also 14 this year. Could she get married in the Great River Kingdom? After drinking the mutton soup, Cat Girl quickly took off the furry collar around her neck, rolled up her sleeves, and washed the bowls, chopsticks, pots and pans, regardless of Ning Ke's objection. Looking at the busy little figure by the lake, Ning Ke naturally thought of Sang Sang again. In the more than a month after leaving Chang'an City, he rarely thought of the little handmaiden at home. However, after meeting Cat Girl, he thought of Sang Sang more and more often, not knowing whether it was because of their similar age and figure or other reasons. A small gift to express my gratitude. When Cat Girl said goodbye, Ning Ke took out a box of snacks from his bag and handed it to her. Cat Girl wanted to refuse, but when she saw the exquisite emblem on the wooden box, her big eyes suddenly lit up and she shouted in surprise, is this the osmanthus cake from Chang'an City? Furong store? It seems so. The pastries in Ning Ke's bag were all prepared by Mistress Jian, and the snacks prepared by Xiao Chao were undoubtedly Sang Sang's favorite. He vaguely remembered that it seemed to be the osmanthus cake from some store. Furong store sells other pastries in the capital city, but we don't have osmanthus cake, because this osmanthus cake is made from the osmanthus outside the Daming Palace. Cat Girl was pleasantly surprised and held the box of pastries like holding a treasure. She took out a piece and carefully put it into her mouth to chew, with a very happy and intoxicated smile on her face. Looking at the smile on the little girl's face, Ning Ke was very happy. He remembered that when he brought back pastries for Sang Sang from the House of Red Sleeves last year, she seemed to smile like this. But why did he think of her again? My love is on the mountainside. It's too high to find her. My love gave me osmanthus cake. What should I give her? Knockout drug? Ning Ke always felt that he seemed to have read such a poem somewhere, but he couldn't remember the specific year, month, and day of this memory. He was only a little uneasy because of the osmanthus cake in the poem. He secretly hoped that the female disciple of the Black Ink Garden would not misunderstand his meaning. Although there were no pear blossoms on his head, he did not want to bully the tender flowers and grass. It turned out that he thought too much, or the disciples of the Black Ink Garden had already planned to deal with this kind of thing. The next day after he gave the osmanthus cake, the female disciple named Zhuozhihua came with a big pot of stewed fish as a return gift. The stewed fish was really sweet and smooth, and the attitude of the girls of the Great River Kingdom was really gentle. There was nothing wrong with it, which really made people feel flattered. Ning Ke could not eat for free, so he took out a box of pastries from his bag as a return gift. The days gradually passed in the exchange of various stewed pots of the Great River Kingdom and various pastries from Cheng and City. The coldness of the wilderness of the north of Yan Kingdom was getting deeper and deeper. Winter was officially coming. The thin ice on the lakeside gradually melted and condensed, becoming a whole piece like a mirror. Only the ice near the shore of the hot spring lake was still a piece of blue. Although they did not talk too much and did not even meet too many times, Ning Ke and the girls of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom had become familiar with each other. The girls did not ask his origin, the name of his master, and he did not ask why they did not stay in the coalition army camp but chose to come to this wilderness. Winter was coming, and the coldness was getting stronger. The hot spring behind the yellow cloth fell along the steep cliff, forming a stream and pool. White steam filled the air, but it was still as warm as spring. Because the temperature inside the cloth was too high, Cat Girl only wore a small close-fitting underwear. She sat on the wet stone by the stream, kicking her 2 small feet and holding a few pastries in her hands, happily eating. The light underwear was stuck to the girl's still developing body by the humidity in the air, showing a few slightly bulging curves. She looked at the pool below the warm stream and shouted, "The last 2 pieces of osmanthus cake, you really don't want to eat?" Zhuozhihua walked to the stream, looked at the direction of the pool, and said with a smile, "Hill Master, have a try." The milky white mist filled the top of the pool, and only a vague figure could be seen. Suddenly a cold wind blew from the depths of the forest, passing through the cloth and blowing the hot mist on the surface of the pool, making it shake uneasily, and the sight became a little clearer. There was a rock sticking out of the water in the pool. A girl sat quietly on the rock, with her back to the stream bank. Her lower body was wrapped in a thin white wet cloth, and her upper body was bare. Her black hair fell like a waterfall on her naked back, and watered drops slowly fell from the ends of her hair. "You guys eat." Zhuozhihua looked at the girl in the pool and said worriedly, "Hill Master, the Allied forces are not willing to pay attention to us at all. Whether it is the logistics or the camp, there are many difficulties. Are we going to stay here forever?" Cat Girl threw the wet hair on her shoulder to the back, walked to the edge of the pool and said angrily, "In my opinion, we might as well go to Dongxing Stockade Village. The general of the Tang Empire will definitely welcome us." Zhuozhihua rubbed her head and said helplessly, "Although the Great River Empire and the Tang Empire have been on good terms for generations, the disciples of Black Ink Garden came here under the edict of the Divine Hall. Your Majesty doesn't dare to offend the Divine Hall. And don't forget that Master is a visiting professor of the Divine Hall. If we leave the coalition army and go to the Tang camp, we will bring trouble to Master." Cat Girl rolled her dark eyes and said, "Senior sister, why don't we just tell them your identity? When I saw the flower addict, Lu Chenjia, entering the military camp with the Revelation Institute a few days ago, those fellows from the Yan Kingdom and the Yueluan Kingdom were so obedient and respectful. If they knew that you were here, they wouldn't dare to treat us so badly." After a moment of silence, the black-haired girl on the rock in the pond said softly, "There is no need to fight over such trivial matters." One day, Ning Ke came to the lakeside a little earlier than usual. He put down his luggage by the stone pond and thought that the girls of Black Ink Garden should still be resting, so he casually glanced at that place. Then he saw a picturesque scenery. He saw a picturesque painting as beautiful as a scenery. In the dim morning light, a girl stood at the end of the slanting branches extending to the winter lake. The girl was dressed in a light white dress. Her black hair casually tied behind her back like a waterfall. Her bare feet stepped on the thin branches. As the cold wind blew over the lake, the branches swayed up and down gently. Her body also swayed slightly with it. She looked extremely comfortable, as if what came to her face was not the winter wind of the wilderness, but a warm spring breeze. Ning Ke looked at her quietly and did not make a sound. He subconsciously did not want to destroy this picture. The girl in white standing at the end of the slanting branches seemed to sense his gaze. She gently waved her white sleeves and disappeared behind the yellow cloth in an instant. Only the thin branches were still swaying gently in the lake wind. Ning Ke looked at the slightly trembling branches and slowly raised his eyebrows. He did not see her face clearly. He only remembered the blue ribbon tied around the waist of her white dress when she left like a ghost. A touch of white dress, like the clouds on the lake. A touch of blue, like the water in the lake. I think it will be interesting to look back at this chapter a year later. I will try my best to satisfy myself. Good night, everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 201. The girl in white disappeared behind the cloth and never appeared again. From morning to evening, Ning Ke turned to look at the direction of the mountain stream from time to time. His neck and eyes began to ache, but he still couldn't see the girl in white. He secretly guessed the identity of the girl, but could only be sure that she was a female disciple of the Black Ink Garden in the Great River Kingdom. He couldn't think of anything else, so he had to resentfully pack up and return to Dongxing Stockade Village. During the time when winter began to cover the wilderness, the situation in the north of Yan Kingdom quietly but clearly changed. The sporadic battles between the Central Plains Coalition Army and the Left King's Palace led to hundreds of cavalry corpses in the wilderness, and also prevented any trade between the two sides. Both sides' determination and bargaining chips had been seen clearly, so the Chanyu of the Left King's Palace unexpectedly sent a messenger to convey his idea of peace to the Central Plains people. As Ning Ke analyzed, neither the West Hill Divine Palace nor Chang and City regarded the Left King's Palace as their real enemy, and the Left King's Palace was not so weak that they would be defeated in one blow. Although the barbarian cavalry wandering in the winter grass suffered a great loss from the wilderness people returning to the south, it didn't mean that they were really afraid of the Central Plains people, especially the army of Yan Kingdom on the eastern front. Therefore, after some superficial reprimand and discussion, the Central Plains Coalition Army agreed to the Left King's Chanyu's request for peace. Since the beginning of the negotiation, of course, there must be someone who was responsible for unifying the thinking and leading the negotiation process. General Xiahou naturally couldn't leave Tiang City to the wilderness to negotiate in person, and the Tang Empire would not allow the West Hill Divine Palace to preside over this matter. After several arguments, the final decision was that everyone should go. The tentative attack and defense in the wilderness had nothing to do with Ning Ke, and the upcoming negotiation had nothing to do with him. Although the upper level of the Yen army knew that his background was terrible, after all, he didn't have any military identity. In fact, with his current status, there was no harm in representing the Tang army to negotiate. But the counselors in the general's mansion in Tiang City, just like in the past 2 months, did not dare to let him take the risk in the wilderness. The north wind whistled outside the window, and the room was hot. Ning Ke was focused on reading by the dim light at the table. The captain glanced at him and said, 3 days ago, someone from Tiang City disguised as a caravan and left the city. Their direction should be the wilderness. Although the peace talks are about to start, the ban on commerce has not been lifted. I don't know why these people are so anxious. I don't think they are spies from the military camp. As a secret guard of the Empire, the captain followed Ning Ke's lead after knowing his identity. Logically speaking, a secret guard could only report what he knew and not make any guesses. However, thinking of the strange caravan in Tiang City, he could not hold back and said tentatively, I heard that General Xiahou is a visiting professor of the West Hill Divine Palace. You don't have to sound me out like a woman here. I don't know what His Majesty wants to do. You don't have to know what I'm going to do in the wilderness of the north of Yan Kingdom under His Majesty's secret order. Ning Ke put down the scroll in his hand, looked at him, shook his head and said, the whole world knows that General Xiahou is a visiting professor of the West Hill Divine Palace, but so what? Liu Bai, the Sage of Sword, is also a visiting professor of the Divine Hall. My teacher is the great divine priest of the Divine Hall. The people of the Tang Empire also believe in Haotian. Is this a crime? Looking at the hesitant subordinate, he smiled and waved his hand. He continued, if General Xiahou wants to see someone from the West Hill Divine Palace, why can't he? Why must he secretly meet in the wilderness of the north of Yan Kingdom during the war? He is not an idiot. Don't think too much. Just continue to help me look after Tiang City. The captain took the order and left. Ning Ke looked at the weak flame of the oil lamp on the table and slowly frowned. As he said before, the Tangs respected Haotian. However, everyone knew that the Empire and the Divine Hall were two sides of the same coin. Otherwise, why would the South School of Haotian appear? As a general of the Empire, Xiahou was a visiting professor of the West Hill Divine Palace. Why did His Majesty tolerate him so much? Why did His Majesty suddenly not trust Xiahou after so many years? If Xiahou really colluded with the West Hill Divine Palace secretly and tried to harm the Empire, what could he do? The most important thing was, what could the Divine Hall give him? With the real arrival of winter, the north of Yan Kingdom ushered in the first snow. Dongxing Stockade Village also ushered in an array tactical master. The array tactical master took the document of the middle military camp and said that because of the cold weather, the middle military camp was worried that the defensive tactical arrays in the frontier fortress defense lines would be damaged. Therefore, he was sent to check and repair them. There were very few cultivators in the world, and talisman masters and array tactical masters were even rarer. No matter in the bustling city or the bitter cold frontier fortress, such people were always respected. Especially on the battlefield, if there was an excellent array tactical master, the military defense line would naturally be more stable. Therefore, the arrival of this array tactical master was warmly welcomed by the generals and ordinary soldiers. The general of Dongxing Stockade Village eagerly welcomed this array tactical master into the tent. He was ready to slaughter sheep and cook cattle to entertain him. Unexpectedly, the array tactical master waved his hand to send away the soldiers who served him. Looking around and no one was around, he asked seriously, "Is Mr. 13 here?" The jet-black waist token seemed to reflect no light. It was dull and dark but not dirty. It was more like a piece of black jade that had been soaked in the ink lake of the great river kingdom for thousands of miles. The two waist tokens slowly approached each other. When they were only a little bit apart, they seemed to be attracted by some kind of suction and automatically stuck together. Those seemingly inconspicuous but actually wonderful secret talismans on them were perfectly wedged together. Ning Ke looked at the waist tokens that were put together and curiously said, "It turns out that there is such a use. The waist tokens of the Imperial Center Administration are all specially made. Even the West Hill Divine Palace is difficult to forge. Therefore, as long as you see the waist token, you can confirm the identity of the holder." The array tactical master from the middle military camp explained a few words to Ning Quebec. Then he stood up and made a deep bow, saying respectfully, "Chu Xianga, the array tactical master of the Imperial Center Administration, greets Your Excellency." Ning Ke looked at the array tactical master's gray hair and did not want to accept the bow. He quickly helped him up and said, "I am just a non-staff member of the Imperial Center Administration. I am not a lord." The array tactical master looked at the jet-black waist token in his hand. His eyes were full of sighs and smiles. He explained, "Your Excellency, your waist token is not something that a non-staff member can hold in his hand. This waist token has extremely high authority. Except for the Master of Nation and the Chief Officer of the Imperial Center Administration, even the wayfarer of the South School can't command you." Ning Ke took back the waist token and held it in the air for a long time. However, he did not see anything special about it. He thought that when he entered the palace that day, when His Majesty finally gave him this waist token, he was quite dissatisfied. If this waist token was really as powerful as this person said, he seemed to have wronged His Majesty. Even if we don't talk about the official position of the Imperial Center Administration, I am the 34th generation disciple of the South School of Haotian. You are the successor of Master Yen Sei. According to seniority, you are my grandmaster. Could it be that you want me to kneel down and kowtow to you? Ning Ke smiled and waved his hand. He said, I know that I have a high seniority, but I didn't expect it to be so high. Let's cut to the chase. You must have something important to tell me today. The desolate man went south and forced the tribes of the left king's palace to move south. This matter is not a big deal. So when the Divine Hall issued the edict, the imperial court has been feeling a little strange. Even if they are afraid that the remnants of the devil's doctrine may be revived because of the desolate man, there is no reason to make such a big scene. The apologetic cavalry is not a big deal. It can be explained that the Divine Hall wants to show its power to the believers in the world. But in addition to Prince Longqing, I heard that the Divine Hall has sent more powerful powerhouses. Many spies of the judicial department have already sneaked into the wilderness. What do they want to do? The array tactical master looked into Ning Ke's eyes and said seriously, the Imperial Court asked the Imperial Center Administration to investigate the reason why the Divine Hall made such a big fuss. We have mobilized a lot of people, even our fellow disciples in the Divine Hall. Hearing this, Ning Ke slightly raised his eyebrows and asked, the Imperial Center Administration actually has people in the Divine Hall? The array tactical master nodded and explained with a smile, after all, the South School and the Divine Hall are of the same origin. The Divine Hall must have hidden people in the South School. Naturally, the South School can also hide people in the Divine Hall. The people in the South School are naturally our people in the Imperial Center Administration. The explanation is clear enough. Please continue. We spent a month to find out that this matter should be related to the legendary 7 tomes of Arcane. But, sir, I'm sorry that we have no evidence. We just got a piece of cloth. The array tactical master took out a piece of cloth from his sleeve. Judging from the stitches, this piece of cloth should be the hem of a shirt. Then, it was torn by brute force. There were 2 dark red words on the cloth, Ming Scroll. Ning Ke looked at the 2 words on the cloth and frowned. He reached out his hand and gently touched the dark red and black handwriting. He said, this is a blood letter. The array tactical master looked at him and said in a low voice, our companions in the Divine Hall tried every means to send out this piece of cloth. After that, there was no more news. I guess it must have been discovered. To be able to discover such a big secret in a place like the Westhill Divine Palace and be able to send out this secret, it could be imagined that the spy of the Imperial Center Administration in the Westhill had a high status in the Divine Hall. Ning Ke frowned and looked at the 2 words on the cloth. After a long silence, he said, based on these 2 words, how can you confirm that it is related to the 7 tomes of Arcane? If it is not, then isn't it a pity that he died? The array tactical master said, after seeing the 2 words on the cloth, no one in the Imperial Center Administration connected it with the legendary 7 tomes of Arcane. Until the Master of Nations saw it, he confirmed that the Ming Scroll was one of the 7 tomes of Arcane. Ning Ke held the cloth in his hand and looked up at his eyes. After thinking for a moment, he asked, then how can you confirm that the Divine Hall sending powerhouses into the wilderness is related to this matter? Because this tomes of Arcane is very likely to be with the desolate. The array tactical master said. Ning Ke asked puzzledly, the devil's doctrine originated from the desolate's tribe. Why would the tomes of Arcane of the Haotian sect be with the desolate? The array tactical master looked at him with a complicated expression. He was very puzzled that the core disciple of the headmaster of Academy, the future master of Nation of Tang, did not know the most famous history in the cultivation world. Your Excellency. Countless years ago, the desolate occupied the northern part of the continent. They were known as the most powerful country. At that time, the Divine Hall of Haotian sent the great divine priest of light to the wilderness to preach. They wanted to bring the desolate into the divine light of Haotian. However, no one could have thought that the great divine priest of light, who had exquisite doctrine and high prestige, would enter a different path in the process of preaching to the desolate. He created a cultivation method that was completely different from the right path. Ning Ke rubbed his head and asked incredulously, "Is this cultivation method the kung fu of the devil's doctrine?" Yes. The founder of the devil's doctrine was actually the great divine priest of light of the West Hill Divine Palace. Ning Ke did not know about this dusty past until today. He could not help but feel shocked. He thought that they were actually a family after all. The array tactical master continued, "The great divine priest of light was excellent in learning and strict in teaching. He was best at enlightening ordinary people. Back then, the divine hall had great expectations for him to preach in the wilderness. They even let him bring a tomes of arcane. When he founded the devil's doctrine and became the enemy of the divine hall, this tomes of arcane was naturally left in the wilderness and never appeared in the Central Plains again. Decades ago, the sects of the devil's doctrine hidden in the Central Plains were all wiped out by the right path of the Central Plains. Even the mysterious front gate of the devil's doctrine was said to have been chopped into ruins by a senior sublime being with a single sword. However, no one has found the tomes of arcane. Breaking into the mountain with a single sword and chopping the front gate of the devil's doctrine into ruins. Listening to the deeds of the senior sublime being, Ning Ke seemed to have seen the scenes of the past. He was excited and his skin was slightly numb. However, he did not know why he faintly felt that the senior sublime being had something to do with him, or at least with the academy. Who is that senior sublime being? I don't know. Since even the front gate of the devil's doctrine does not have the tomes of arcane, then there is only one possibility. It has been taken to the cold region of the far north by the desolate as early as 1,000 years ago. The cold region of the far north is bitterly cold and far away. Moreover, the desolate are very strong. Even the grand cultivators of the knowing destiny state dare not set foot there. Therefore, this guess has always been a guess. However, now that the desolate have moved south from the cold region of the far north, the divine hall will certainly find the tomes of arcane. Hearing this, Ning Ke finally understood why the imperial court made such a judgment about the intention of the divine hall. He also believed that the Westhill Divine Palace would not hesitate to start a bloody war in order to get the tomes of arcane that had been lost for thousands of years. They would not hesitate to let thousands of people bleed and sacrifice. They would even not hesitate to let Prince Longqing and even more important people take risks. From the emperor to the peddlers, everyone in the world knew that the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane were the most sacred classics of Haotian Taoism. However, almost no one knew what the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane were or what was recorded in them. There were many legends about the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane. Some said that the tomes of arcane recorded the will of Haotian to the human world. Some said that the tomes of arcane recorded the prophecies of the world. Some said that the tomes of arcane itself was a supreme instrument that condensed the power of heaven and earth. There were also rumors that mortals could cultivate by just looking at the tomes of arcane, cultivators could break through the realm by just looking at the tomes of arcane, ghosts in the underworld could be purified and reborn by just looking at the tomes of arcane, and saints could become immortals by just looking at the tomes of arcane. Ning Ke had heard of these legends. However, at that time, his life was too far away from the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane. He did not care at all and even somewhat did not believe in the existence of the tomes of arcane. Today, he finally knew that the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane were real. However, he still did not believe those rumors. He felt that the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane were more likely to be the secret of Haotian Taoism, some kind of earth-shattering unique cultivation method. At this time, he did not know that his name had appeared in the first volume of the tomes of arcane. The tomes of arcane are very important and everyone wants them. However, what does this have to do with me? After all, he was a disciple of the 2nd floor of the academy. Although his state was still too weak, he was more or less tainted with the obsession and pride of his senior brothers and senior sisters at the back of the mountain. Ning Ke was not shocked by the name of the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane for too long. He soon sobered up and looked at the array tactical master and asked, The array tactical master glanced out of the window and whispered in his ear, "The nation master asked me to tell you that it is very difficult to find the tomes of arcane in the wilderness. Ordinary cultivators have no power in front of the divine hall. After all, he and Master Yen Sei are the great divine priests of the divine hall, so it is not convenient for them to do anything. However, you happen to be in the north of Yen Kingdom, so this matter falls on my head?" Ning Kei stared at him and asked. "Exactly. Even this corner of the cloth with the bloody words written on it was personally ordered by the nation master. He specially sent someone to bring it from Chang and for you to see." Ning Kei stared at the snowflakes floating outside the window and was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he asked, "What does the tomes of arcane look like?" The array tactical master replied respectfully, "I don't know." Ning Kei's eyes fell on his face and continued to ask, "How big or small?" The array tactical master answered honestly, "I don't know." Ning Kei's eyebrows twitched slightly. He forcibly suppressed his emotions and asked again, "Which volume did the divine hall lose?" The array tactical master shook his head and said, "I still don't know." Then he pointed to the corner of the cloth in Ning Kei's hand and said, "It should be the Ming volume." Ning Kei held the corner of the cloth and looked at it. He frowned and asked, "Ming volume, which volume is it?" The array tactical master coughed and looked at him carefully and said, "I told you before, but I don't know." Ning Kei said angrily, "If you don't know anything, how can I find it?" The array tactical master looked at him innocently and said slowly, "I heard that even the divine hall is not qualified to worship the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane. The tomes of arcane come from the unknown place. How can an ordinary person like me know?" Ning Kei's frown deepened when he heard the words, "unknown place." He thought of the fact that Chin Pippi had already revealed half of his chubby face and the occasional words he heard in the academy. He felt that this matter was really troublesome. "Sir, you are the future nation master of the Tang Empire and the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. You cultivate in the back mountain of the academy every day and know much more than me. You should know better than me what the tomes of arcane look like." Ning Kei was stunned. He thought that he had been busy cultivating and shooting arrows in the back mountain of the academy all day, so he had no time to pay attention to the top legends of the cultivation world. He also had no chance to ask his senior brothers and sisters about their stories. Did he have to tell him such things? After the array tactical master left, Ning Kei sat by the window and looked at the wind and snow coming from the wilderness. He thought for a long time. It was not until today that he realized that he had underestimated himself after entering the second floor of the academy. He did not expect that even the legendary items like the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane had begun to have a connection with him. If he had known, he would have used the crab porridge to lure Chin Pippi to tell him about his past and ask about the secrets of the unknown place and the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane. Suddenly, he remembered that the general's mansion of Tiang City had sent people disguised as a caravan to enter the wilderness. He slowly frowned. Could it be that Xiaohou also wanted to get the volume of the tomes of arcane that had been lost for thousands of years? If so, it seemed that no matter how difficult it would be, he had to plan well after entering the wilderness. Last night, I inexplicably caught a cold and rhinitis. Today, I was in a daze and worked very hard to write. Then, in the afternoon, I found out that 72 was sick. His illness is much more troublesome than mine. I became another poor person after the white bird. My heart could not help but feel heavy. I wish everyone good health and happiness for the whole family. I will not rest tomorrow, but I don't know how much I can write. Just try your best. Today's recommendation votes are very fierce. I am very gratified. It is this gratification that forced me not to lie on the bed like a corpse. Please continue to vote for me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 202. From his previous life to this life, Ning Kei grew up soaked in blood and rotten flesh. He did not have any excessive moral cleanliness in his bones. In order to achieve his goals, he would do anything. Therefore, he never thought that he would break into the camp alone and die, spitting blood everywhere when he could not even shake Xia Ho, the ruthless deity. That seemed to be hot-blooded and glorious, but in his eyes, it was just an idiotic behavior of abandoning oneself to despair. If you died in style, Xia Ho would still be sitting at the table, and maybe he would even use your head as a wine cup. At that time, you, who had turned into bones, could only stare at him with your dark eye sockets and could not hurt him at all. But it didn't mean that the clear understanding of Xia Ho's powerful strength would make him timid. He had been secretly watching the general with outstanding military exploits, carefully looking for the opponent's loopholes, pondering the various details of the battle and the future, and even unscrupulously thinking about how to drag second brother and Shin Pippi into the mud. According to his analysis, Xia Ho was at the peak of martial arts, which was equal to the knowing destiny state. Second brother and Shin Pippi, who were at the knowing destiny state, together with himself, could definitely kill Xia Ho. What he needed to think about was how to tie these two senior brothers to his belt and let them join him in this vigorous cause. However, before he figured out how to use the academy to deal with Xia Ho, he heard the news that one of the 7 tomes of arcane was lost in the wilderness. Thinking of the caravan that secretly sneaked out of Tiang City, he felt slightly anxious. If Xia Ho really got that tomes of arcane and broke through the realm as easily as rumored, who could beat him? He opened the window and looked at the gradually heavier wind and snow outside. Thinking of the irreconcilable hatred between himself and Xia Ho and the hatred left by Darky on his shoulder, he shook his head and said, "I can't allow this to happen." Although more than 100,000 reinforcements from various countries gathered at the border of northern Yan Kingdom, including young powerhouses from Yueluan Kingdom's White Tower, South Jin Kingdom's Sword Garret, and Great River Kingdom's Black Ink Garden, the only one who was really qualified to compete with the judicial department of the Divine Hall for the tomes of arcane was this powerful general who had fought at the border for many years. Of course, this was under the condition that the Tang Empire and the Academy did not officially take action. Ning Ke said to himself, His Majesty suspects that Xia Ho will collude with the Divine Hall as a visiting professor of the Divine Hall. Will Xia Ho have a conflict with the Divine Hall for this tome of arcane? What can you make of it? It was impossible for him to come up with a real solution by looking at the snow and admiring the scenery, but he was becoming more and more determined. Now the wilderness must be full of powerhouses. The judicial department of the Divine Hall, Prince Long Qing, and even the Tao addict Yi Hong Yu, who even Shin Pippi was afraid of, might be in the wilderness. With his current no-doubt state, even if he went there, it seemed that he would not be of any use, but he still had to go. He crossed the river by feeling the stones and stepped on the winter grass to enter the plain. He made the appropriate measures according to the situation. As long as Xia Ho did not get the Tome of Arcane, he was even willing to help the Westhill Divine Palace and even burn the Tome of Arcane. Since he had nothing to do, he closed the window, took off his clothes and got into the warm quilt. It was a great pity that the erotic novel he took in the cliff cave of the Academy did not bring coldness to the border. Lying on his side on the warm and hard brick bed, he thought about the matter of going to the wilderness and the annoyance of not having a quilt to tuck in. After tossing and turning for a while, he fell asleep. The wind and snow outside the house became heavier and lasted for a whole night. When Ning Ke woke up the next morning, the sky, which was supposed to be dim, had already become extremely bright and easily pierced through the window into the house. He rubbed his eyes and walked to the window. He pushed the window open and saw a snow-white world between heaven and earth, which was so clean and bright that it made his heart palpitate. The lakeside had long been frozen, but the lake in the distance was not completely frozen. The ice floating on the surface of the water carried the white snow that fell last night, looking like a group of fluffy white grass, beautiful and somewhat lovely. The slanting branches and leaves of the lakeside carried the snow, as if someone had woven a shabby white towel for a giraffe. Hot mist sprayed out from the nostrils of the big black horse, and the horse's hooves stepped on the snow by the lakeside, leaving a messy abstract painting. Ning Ke rode on the back of the horse and looked at the blue sea covered with winter snow, feeling refreshed and comfortable. When he came to the side of the stone pool where he had been meditating these days, he found that the water that seeped into the pool from the lake had long been frozen into a piece of transparent jade. There was not a single snowflake on it, and it looked very clean. He stretched out his hand in the air to feel the wind, and understood that it was because the north wind had become stronger. Just as he was thinking about this, a few muffled sounds suddenly came from the wind, which seemed to be the sound of metal and some kind of hardwood colliding. He stepped on the horse's pedal and straightened his body to look at the source of the sound. He saw that the yellow cloth around the hot spring was still the same, but between the snow forest, he could faintly see the strong wind splashing and two figures fighting. Ning Ke naturally had his own reasons for coming to the lakeside today, even though he had already decided to go deep into the wilderness. This reason had something to do with the women from the Great River Kingdom beside the hot spring. However, he had not decided on what exactly to plan, and did not expect to see such a scene in advance. Stepping on the horse's pedal, his line of sight was naturally much clearer, and he could clearly see what was going on there. Zhuo Zhihua stood up with difficulty with the help of her junior sister. A stream of blood slowly flowed down from the corner of her mouth, dripping on the snow that was full of messy footprints under her, making a popping sound. Not far in front of her, there was an ascetic monk wearing a bamboo hat. Even in such a cold weather, the monk was still barefoot. His right thumb slowly played the prayer beads, and his left hand held an iron staff, the head of which was deep into the snow. Zhuo Zhihua was the third disciple of Black Ink Garden, and had the most profound skills among the group of boys and girls. However, she was still no match for this ascetic monk. Thinking of the cold treatment she had suffered in the Yen Kingdom these days and the humiliation today, she stared at him and said sternly, "You let us live in the wettest and coldest place in the military camp. We had no choice but to leave the military camp and hide in the wilderness. Are you still not satisfied?" The ascetic monk slowly raised his head. The bamboo hat covered the upper half of his face, and the lower half that was exposed was cold and emotionless. The distribution of the camp is the matter of the Yen Kingdom's general. What does it have to do with our Yueluan Kingdom? Zhuo Zhihua lifted her sleeve to wipe the blood from the corner of her mouth, and asked, "Then why do you still want this hot spring? You have used this hot spring for so many days. It should be enough." The ascetic monk from the Yueluan Kingdom gave a simple and rude reason. Obviously, he only cared about driving the boys and girls from the Great River Kingdom away from the hot spring, and did not care about any reason. Everything has to be reasonable. Zhuo Zhihua looked down slightly, and her hands once again grasped the slender Xiu sword at her waist. She said in a low voice, "First come, first served. Even a 3-year-old child knows that. Don't you know that?" The ascetic monk replied indifferently, "I am a monk, and I don't know about worldly affairs." Zhuo Zhihua adjusted her breathing, and then raised her head. A trace of determination flashed in her bright eyes. The ascetic monk noticed that she was preparing to draw her sword, and knew that she might use the ultimate move of Black Ink Garden. He frowned slightly and said unhappily, "We are all righteous people. Do we have to fight to the death? To tell you the truth, this hot spring is for my aunt and the princess. You'd better get out of the way." Hearing the words, aunt, and princess, the determination in Zhuo Zhihua's eyes suddenly disappeared, and she subconsciously turned her head to look at the yellow cloth. The girls of Black Ink Garden behind her also became even more silent. The aunt that the monk from the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom mentioned was naturally Aunt Cuny Maddie, who had a high state but was unreasonable. The princess he mentioned was naturally one of the 3 famous addicts in the world, flower addict Lu Chenjia. So what if she is flower addict Lu Chenjia? Can she just rob someone else's place? Cat Girl shouted loudly. Because of the cold weather, her cheeks were slightly red, and her face was covered with more furry fur, which made her look very cute. Even if she reprimanded the other party, it would only make people want to laugh. However, the monk from the White Tower Temple could not laugh. Hearing this girl mention the princess who was deeply loved and respected by the monks of the Yueluan Kingdom, his face under the shadow of the bamboo hat became even more gloomy. "Patroness, be careful of the trouble that comes from the mouth. Cat girl snorted coldly, walked to Zhuo Zhihua and said, "Senior sister, take a break." After saying this, she took off her shoes and slowly walked forward, holding the long sword at her waist tightly. She looked at the ascetic monk and said in a clear voice, "Cat girl of Black Ink Garden, please enlighten me, master." When she held the ebony handle of the sword with both hands, the cute expression on the girl's face disappeared, leaving only silence and sternness. Her white socks stepped on the white snow, making a slight squeaking sound, giving the audience a very strange feeling. The ascetic monk's expression was slightly dignified. He stretched out his right hand, and the string of black prayer beads slowly rotated. "Kill!" A sharp and clear voice burst out from Cat Girl's cute little mouth. A light cyan luster flashed through the snow forest, and the sword was instantly pulled out from the sheath at her waist. With an indomitable momentum, she carried her small body and instantly crossed the distance between the two of them. Accompanied by the whistling sword she slashed towards the monk's body. The ascetic monk was caught off guard, and with a muffled groan, he retreated. His bare black feet kicked up countless snowballs mixed with grass roots on the snow, and the string of black prayer beads in his right hand flew to his chest and rotated with a whistling sound. The cyan luster disappeared as soon as it appeared. The ascetic monk reached out to grab the black prayer beads, and scratches appeared on the surface of the hard prayer beads. The cotton monk's robe on his body was cut open by the sword edge, and the cotton split open, revealing a faint bloodstain. If Cat Girl's sword had gone deeper, the monk would have been cut open and died on the spot. Cat Girl maintained the posture of half-squatting and holding the sword. Her chest rose and fell slightly, her face was slightly red, and she gasped softly. Her bright eyes were full of excitement. This was the first time she had fought with someone, and she didn't expect to win. The ascetic monk looked down at the sword mark on his chest, and his stone-like jaw trembled slightly in shock and anger. He stared coldly at Cat Girl and said in a cold voice, "A little girl who has just entered the no-doubt state is so cruel." Cat Girl's previous slash against the snow was the sword-drawing movement of the Great River sect, which focused on being mysterious and decisive, leaving no chance for the enemy to fight back. However, in the monk's view, such a sudden move was no different from a sneak attack. If it wasn't a sneak attack, how could she hurt him? The monk of the Yueluan kingdom chanted the name of Buddha and used his psyche power. The chi of heaven and earth around him began to gather, and the dead leaves and snow in the snow forest began to flutter. The string of black prayer beads in his hand whistled and flew toward Cat Girl's little face. Cat Girl felt the strong wind blowing on her face, and looked at the black prayer beads approaching her in an instant. Her reaction was obviously slower than before. After all, it was the first time for a little girl to fight. She thought that since she had won a sword strike from her opponent and had shown mercy, the battle was over. She didn't expect that her opponent would start to attack again. At this critical moment, her body instinctively made the most appropriate response after practicing drawing the sword day after day by the Ink Lake at the foot of Mogan Mountain. With another childish cry, White Socks stepped on the white snow and moved backward. She turned her hands over, and the slender sword hanging in the air around her waist was lifted up and chopped toward the prayer beads. However, the string of prayer beads, which was whistling and rotating at a high speed, suddenly changed shape in the air, avoided the sharp blade, and then turned back to cover the blade in Cat Girl's hand. The prayer beads covered the bright blade, and a powerful force passed down, making Cat Girl unable to move her sword at all. She could only watch helplessly as the ascetic monk's iron staff, which had been held in his left hand, smashed down on her head. "Buddha is merciful," the ascetic monk shouted sternly. Cat Girl couldn't move the prayer beads no matter how hard she tried. She could only let the shadow of the staff cover her red little face. In the snow forest, the girls of the Great River Kingdom screamed, but it was too late to help. In the yellow cloth near the warm stream, a right hand holding a brush paused slightly, as if preparing to do something. At this moment, the whistling sound of an arrow suddenly broke through the lakeside. A shadow of an arrow came from outside the forest like a flash of lightning. It flew close to Catgirl's slender sword and accurately shot the string of black prayer beads in a very small space. In the buzzing sound, the arrow shot the black prayer beads out of the sword and into a big tree. The tail of the arrow kept trembling, and the black prayer beads that were nailed in the arrowhead trembled even more violently, but they couldn't escape at all. The sudden change shocked everyone. Catgirl's sword suddenly regained freedom. With the last sword momentum, she forcibly flipped over and blocked the iron staff that was attacking her little face. The heavy tip of the staff smashed beside her, splashing countless mud and snow. The ascetic monk of the Yueluan kingdom didn't look back, but he could feel the attack on his prayer beads of life. He was extremely vigilant. However, the monk, who was used to fighting, ignored the hidden enemy. With a roar, he held the staff with both hands and smashed it on the girl again. Countless footprints appeared on the snowy ground in the forest, and each footprint created a snowflake. A figure suddenly appeared, and a cool blade light rose from the monk's staff. The chill instantly invaded the monk's fingers, and it seemed to be even colder than the winter wind in the wilderness. The monk resolutely abandoned the staff and retreated. The blade did not retreat, but moved forward, breaking his sleeve, cutting his shoulder, and finally resting on the monk's throat coldly. The monk's hands hung down, and he didn't dare to move. Ning-Kei held the slender padao, looked at the monk under the knife, and said, "Master doesn't seem to know mercy. I'm really sick and annoyed. It's too hard to write today. If I can't stand it tomorrow, I'll ask for leave. If I can stand it, I'll write." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 203. The monk of the Yueluan kingdom wanted to smash the lovely cat girl into a pulp with his iron staff, and still shouted, "Buddha is merciful." Therefore, Ning-Kei put the long and thin padao on the monk's neck and said, "Master, you don't seem to know mercy." The skin on the monk's neck trembled slightly because of the coldness on the blade. He looked at Ning-Kei's clothes with alarm and asked in a hoarse voice, "Tang?" Ning-Kei nodded. The monk forced himself to calm down and looked at him through the long and thin blade. He said, "This is a sneak attack." Ning-Kei didn't look at him, but at the snowflakes falling slowly on the blade. He said, "You have the final say." The monk didn't expect his answer to be like this, and didn't know how to answer. His slightly dark cheeks under the bamboo hat were stiff because of shame and anger. He said in a low voice, "Unreasonable." Ning-Kei looked at him and smiled. He said, "I didn't see you being reasonable just now." The monk was speechless. Ning-Kei looked at the face under the shadow of the bamboo hat and suddenly asked, "How do you think we should end this?" The monk's eyes under the bamboo hat brightened slightly. He looked at him and said, "I'm not convinced. Let's fight again." Cat Girl, who was closest to them, heard the monk's words. She blushed and sneered angrily, "Do you have any shame? It was you who sneak attacked me just now, but you say we sneak attacked you. Why should we fight with you?" Ning-Kei didn't seem to hear her words. He slowly moved the padao on the monk's throat and fell on the thick snow. He dragged the padao backward and kept a distance from the monk. The monk looked at him in silence, and then raised his right hand to take off the bamboo hat on his head, revealing his bald head wrapped in green cloth and his indifferent and vigilant eyes. He didn't know who this young Tang man was, and he couldn't see his state. There were only two possibilities. The young Tang man's state was much higher than his, or he was not a cultivator. Could he enter the see-through state at such a young age? The monk thought that the possibility was too small. Moreover, he saw that Ning-Kei's archery was as sharp as a god's and his bladesmanship was sharp, but he did not use any cultivator's skills. He was even more certain that Ning-Kei was an ordinary person. If he was an ordinary person, how could he defeat him again when he was a cultivator who was well prepared? The monk from the Yueluan kingdom stared at Ning-Kei, who was not far away, and took a deep breath. His naked black feet slowly sank into the snow, and the melted water around his feet spread out. The black prayer beads that were nailed to the tree by the feathered arrow trembled violently, and then forcibly broke free from the arrowhead and flew back to him. His right hand grabbed the prayer beads in front of him. "Please." The monk looked at Ning Ke with a solemn expression. A moment later, a ferocious look suddenly appeared on his face. The jet-black prayer beads whistled through the air. After the prayer beads, the iron staff smashed towards Ning Ke's body with a thunderous boom. In the snow forest, grass, withered leaves, and snow were flying everywhere. The chi of heaven and earth was restless, as if it was about to explode. Ning Ke held the thin hilt of the padao with both hands. The engravings on the hilt were densely entwined with straw ropes that were used to absorb sweat. His fingertips felt the most familiar touch of velvet grass. He stared at the iron staff that broke through the wind with the snow and the string of jet-black prayer beads that were whistling and circling. There was no expression on his face. Just as the string of prayer beads increased its speed to the extreme and was about to disappear from his sight, he bent his knees slightly and bounced up like a snow fox that was used to hunting in the snowfield. He followed an extremely low curve and moved forward against the snow. The distance between them was quickly shortened. He flipped his hands and lifted the slender padao from below, flicking off the snowflakes and grass in front of the blade. The sharp tip accurately hit the string of prayer beads that were whistling and circling towards the blade. Accompanied by a sharp grinding sound that made one's teeth ache, the sharp tip of the blade forcibly stopped the rotation of the prayer beads. Immediately after, Ning Ke's wrist moved again and the padao shook, directly flicking the prayer beads away from his body. The prayer beads whimpered and flew diagonally away, falling into some unknown snow. The monk's dark cheeks suddenly turned pale. He could no longer find any trace of the natal prayer beads in his sense of perception. He had suffered a hidden injury. Ning Ke's attack was effective. How could he be soft-hearted? He took a step forward and the slender padao was naturally dragged behind him. He suddenly exerted strength from his waist and abdomen, holding the hilt with both hands and using all his strength to chop forward. The blade cut through the slowly falling snowflakes in the air. The iron staff that was like a gray shadow flying towards his face was cut off. A thunderous sound rang out. A soft hiss. The monk's cotton robe that had already been split open suddenly had a deeper cut. Fresh blood stained the torn cotton. His right foot accurately stepped on the monk's knee. Then he turned his wrist and the slender padao flipped in the air. The back of the padao fiercely chopped the monk's throat, stifling the scream that was about to come out. The monk of Yueluan Kingdom knelt on one knee with a thud. Blood kept flowing from the corner of his mouth. Together with the deep cut on his cotton robe on his chest, he looked really terrible and miserable. But in fact, Ning Ke had a good sense of propriety. The monk's life was not in danger at all. However, when he felt the coldness on his neck again, his dark cheeks had already become extremely pale. Shock, fear, and confusion kept changing in the monk's eyes. He did not understand and could not understand what had happened at that moment. Why could an ordinary person like Ning Ke pick up his natal prayer beads and force him into such a desperate and miserable situation? In a moment, the winner was decided again. Looking at the monk kneeling in the snow with blood, the female disciples of Great River Kingdom Black Ink Garden covered their mouths. They did not sympathize with the abominable monk of Yueluan Kingdom. They just did not expect that the seemingly ordinary slender padao could pick up the prayer beads, the snow, the iron staff, the monk's robe, and even the monk's throat without giving the monk any chance to fight back. The most shocking and confusing scene was the same as the one that made the monk confused and cold. Why could the young Tang's blade pick up the black prayer beads? It had nothing to do with the bladesmanship. The natal prayer beads of Buddhism sect cultivators were like the flying swords of sword masters. They were so fast that the naked eye could not capture their flying trajectory. If one could not see it and could not predict how it would fly, then even the best bladesmanship in the world could not pick it up. But the young Tang did it. The reason why the arrow outside the forest could hit the prayer beads could be explained that Cat Girl was fighting with the monks of Yueluan Kingdom at that time, and the prayer beads were fixed on the Daisho sword. But what about this time? Ning Ke held the hilt with one hand and looked at the monk of Yueluan Kingdom who was half kneeling under the blade. He shook his head and said, "You insisted on fighting the second round. Don't blame me. We are all righteous people. Why do we have to fight to the death?" This was what the monk of the Yueluan Kingdom had said before, after he had injured Zhuo Zhihua, the third disciple of the Black Ink Garden. At this time, Ning Ke had knocked down the monk and returned these words to him. The girls of the Great River Kingdom behind him felt extremely relieved. The monk looked up at Ning Ke and asked hoarsely, "I admit defeat. May I know your name?" Ning Ke was very satisfied that there was only fear and confusion in his eyes instead of hatred. But he was not satisfied with the question that sounded like a martial arts novel. He frowned and said, "Why do you want to know my name? Do you want to get revenge in the future?" "I don't dare." The monk coughed twice and lifted his sleeve to wipe the blood from his lips. He said, "But when the elders ask me when I go back, I can't say that I lost to a nameless Tang." Ning Ke was silent, as if he was thinking about whether he should tell the name of his sect. The monk of Yueluan Kingdom waited in silence. The girls of Great River Kingdom also waited curiously for the answer. Even the hand of the girl behind the yellow cloth gently placed the brush on the inkstone. Ning Ke said, "If the elders of White Tower Temple ask, you can say that the person who defeated you is Zhong Dajuan of the Academy." Hearing the word academy, the monk of Yueluan Kingdom's stiff body trembled slightly. His voice also trembled slightly. He said, "Oh, you are from the Academy. I am really rude. You asked about my sect. You must be thinking of using Yueluan Kingdom's White Tower Temple or even the Divine Hall to suppress me." Ning Ke looked at the green cloth wrapped around the monk's bald head and said, "But unfortunately, I am a student of the Academy. I think everyone agrees that there is no place in this world that can suppress the Academy." The body of the monk of Yueluan Kingdom trembled even more and he said, "I dare not have such an idea. It doesn't matter if there is or not. Our academy has always been the most reasonable place. Our first lesson is etiquette. So when we see things that are unreasonable, we can't help but intervene. A monk who has just entered the no-doubt state dares to be so cruel and merciless. What's so great about being a love-struck fool? Can you rob someone else's place? Kuni Mati, is this the name? You have to follow the rules." While Ning Ke was educating the monk under the knife, he thought of the words of Professor Chao Jifeng and second brother. The professor said that the rules of the academy were very simple. Whoever had the bigger fist set the rules. Obeying the rules was etiquette. Second brother's request for him on the trip to the wilderness was very simple. No matter what situation he was in, he must not lose the face of the academy. In other words, he could only bully others and not be bullied by anyone. In fact, these words had been said by the girls of the Great River Kingdom before. He just repeated them. However, the power of words was naturally completely different when the meat was on the board and the knife was on the neck. The monk of Yueluan Kingdom did not dare to have any doubts. He just listened obediently for fear that the hot-blooded student of the academy would shake his hand and leave another wound on his neck. "Get out of here. Don't come again." Ning Ke moved the padao away and said to the monk. However, in his heart, he said to the proud senior brothers and sisters in the distant mountain in the south of Chang and city and the proud big white goose, youngest brother, I didn't lose the face of the academy. Now I have started to bully others. Thank you for your help, senior brother. You're welcome. Ning Ke did not have the habit and hobby of traveling in Jianghu with a prestigious sect. He stopped Zhuo Zhihua from bowing and said directly, "The name of the academy can't conquer the world. Even if the White Tower Temple is afraid of it, it can still cause you trouble. Be careful." Cat Girl frowned and said unhappily, "Senior brother, why did you give that guy a second chance to fight? What if you couldn't pick the rosary?" Zhuo Zhihua thought that senior brother Zhong was kind enough to help them. How could junior sister blame him? She was worried that he would be unhappy, so she smiled apologetically and said, that monk should be a second-generation disciple of Yueluan Kingdom. I didn't expect him to be defeated by senior brother Zhong. I think senior brother should be one of the best in the academy. The smile on Ning Kei's face was a bit forced. He thought to himself that he was used to hiding his true identity. If he made a name for Zhong Dajuan in the future, it would be too late for him to cry. Ning Kei led the big black horse away from the warm stream and walked slowly along the lakeside. The snowflakes in the air were denser than before. He quietly looked at the snowy lake and kept analyzing the battle today in his mind. The spirit of chivalry, demeanor, and glory had always been dirty air discharged from the human body. They were meaningless to him. The reason why he gave the Yueluan Kingdom monk a second chance was not that he wanted to beat him until he was convinced, but that he needed an opponent to test his knife and to experiment with the new fighting style that he had figured out these days. His compatriots in the Tang military camp definitely could not do it, because they could not be ruthless. A real powerhouse like Prince Longqing definitely could not do it, because it was very likely that he would be killed by his opponent. The White Tower Temple monk that he met today was in the middle state of no doubt state and was the most suitable opponent. He was so suitable that his hands began to tremble with excitement when he held the hilt of his knife. He made 2 strikes in the battle. His speed and precise control of strength had been greatly improved compared to when he was in the city of Wei. But the key point was that he did not use any cultivation methods. He could deal with an opponent at the level of the White Tower Temple monk without any cultivation methods. This was the basis of the fighting style that he wanted to try. On a rainy night in the Spring Breeze Pavilion, Chao Xiaoshu's sword filled with water had killed countless Chong and gangsters. At the entrance of the Northern Mountain Road, the dim sword shadow of the Devil's Doctrine sword master had caused the most elite bodyguards of the Tang Empire to suffer heavy casualties. Compared with ordinary warriors, cultivators always seemed extremely powerful and difficult to defeat. In Ning Kei's view, the main reason was that cultivators used their psyche power to control the chi of heaven and earth. Their natal flying swords or other weapons were much faster than ordinary martial arts skills in the world. Moreover, their trajectory was unpredictable. But this was not a problem for him who had entered the world of cultivation. Although he had only opened 10 acupoints and was extremely poor in aptitude, he could control very little chi of heaven and earth. If he fought with an enemy with a flying sword, he could not gain the upper hand in speed and power. But he was extremely sensitive and could clearly perceive the slightest change in the surrounding chi of heaven and earth. The trace of unnatural change in the chi of heaven and earth could not be captured by all cultivators. Ning Kei was trying to capture it. As long as he could capture it, then he could know when the enemy cultivator would make a move and how the opponent's natal item worked. Today he succeeded. So when the Yueluan Kingdom monk's prayer beads whistled, the trajectory could not be seen by the naked eye. But in his sense of perception, it was extremely clear and extremely slow. Mastering the trajectory of the enemy's natal item was only the first step. In this kind of fighting style, Ning Kei needed to shorten the distance between him and the opponent in the shortest time possible and drag the opponent into close combat. Just like what he said to Situilan that day. In his view, most cultivators in the world were immersed in meditation and flying swords. They could be magicians, but they did not know how to be executioners. And except for the powerhouses at the peak state of martial arts and the masters of the Devil's Doctrine, all the cultivators in the world had a fatal problem. Their bodies and abilities were too weak. Without a strong bodyguard, there was only a road to death when approached by a guy like Ning Kei who had sharp bladesmanship and was used to seeing life and death. The reason why Ning Kei pondered this kind of fighting style was related to his own aptitude in cultivation. Before becoming a divine talisman master and drawing indefinite talismans to protect himself, he had to have some different means to defeat the cultivators who were at the same state or even higher than himself. And this was also related to what Master Yen Sei said before leaving Chang and city. At that time, Master Yen Sei looked at him and said calmly, "Even if you can fly your flying sword into the clouds and kill the enemy thousands of miles away, if the enemy can protect himself within 1 foot, this shocking sword will be meaningless. And even a guy like Lu Bai can only be dumbfounded once your second brother gets close to him." So managing the 1 foot in front of you is more important than anything else. The sword could fly thousands of miles away, but not even a foot in front of him. Ning Ke led the big black horse and stood quietly in the snow by the lake. He looked at the sky thousands of miles away and pulled out his blade to cut off a snowflake in front of him. I spelled it out today. I will try to do it again tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 204. After Ning Ke left, the girls of the Great River Kingdom were still excitedly talking about what had happened. Cat Girl soaked her little feet in the hot spring and said happily, Brother Zhong is indeed a disciple of the academy. No wonder he is so powerful. Zhuo Zhihua looked at her with a smile and said, I had guessed it the first time we met. Otherwise, why did the Hill Master ask us to be so polite to him? If it were someone else, we would have driven him miles away. Then she sighed and said, Fortunately, this senior brother of the academy showed up. I think those people in the Yueluan Kingdom and the Yen camp will behave themselves and won't send people to rob us. Cat Girl was thinking about some details of the battle. Her little feet tapped on the surface of the stream and she raised her head slightly. She asked curiously, Senior Brother Zhong didn't use any cultivation method to defeat that stinky monk. I didn't even feel any fluctuation of psyche power from him. Senior sister, is he a cultivator? Zhuo Zhihua was startled and said, I heard that there are no talented people in the academy this year. The strongest of the 6 in the course of magic skills, Mr. Xia, has only entered the no doubt state. Since Senior Brother Zhong didn't enter the course of magic skills, I guess he can't cultivate. She said this hesitantly because she didn't believe that an ordinary student of the academy who couldn't cultivate could so easily defeat the monks of the White Tower Temple with his sword and arrows. In a quiet corner of the yellow cloth, the hot spring gathered and dispersed. The winter sun shone down from the treetops, gilding everything with a layer of dazzling halo. The black-haired girl in white seemed not to hear the conversation of the girls. She calmly held the brush and slowly wrote. As the tip of the brush moved, her beautiful hair slowly poured down her shoulders. Then, a letter from the Yen camp broke the happy silence of the mountain stream. Today, Ning Ke had embarked on a completely different path from ordinary cultivators. He always held himself to the principle of cultivation without the purpose of defeating the enemy is a waste of time, and constantly tried to learn in his daily cultivation life and combat practice. In a sense, although his state of cultivation was still ordinary, he could already be called a master, especially when facing ordinary cultivators. If he had accompanied Chao Shaoshu to fight the Spring Breeze Pavilion, it would have been much easier to face the swordsmen of South Jin Kingdom and the monks of Yueluan Kingdom. If he had been asked to kill the sword master in the lakeside house in Chang'an City, he would not have been so badly injured. Of course, if he were to encounter those grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state, or powerhouses like Prince Long Qing or Wang Jinglu, no matter how fast his reaction was or how powerful his fighting style was, he would still be scared witless and fall to the ground, waiting to be beaten to death, no matter how fast his reaction was or how powerful his fighting style was. However, if Ning Ke really met such a powerhouse in the wilderness, he naturally had other means. Whether it was the talisman Taoism skills that he had never used in the battle, the brocade bag given to him by Master Yen Sei, or the primordial 13 arrows that gathered the collective wisdom of the back of the mountain of the academy, they would all be his means to save his life. With a calm and objective judgment of his own strength, he had a relatively accurate assessment of the danger of entering the wilderness. He was clear that it was impossible for him to forcibly snatch the tomes of arcane from the various powerhouses. However, it should not be a big problem to secretly watch or occasionally play some tricks to cause some trouble for Xiaoho. Hiding his identity and sneaking into the wilderness was good for sightseeing. If the situation suddenly changed and he really angered those unworldly sublime beings with a wave of their hands, he would be forced into a dead end where he could neither escape nor hide. At that time, he still had 2 last means to save his life. It was just that those 2 means were not known to outsiders. Your Excellency, you want to enter the wilderness alone? I swear to die rather than obey you. On the surface, he was the trusted lieutenant of the general's mansion, but in reality, he was the secret bodyguard of His Majesty. With an indignant and resolute expression on his face, he drew several small flowers with his shiny steel saber in front of him. Then, without hesitation, he put it on his own neck. If you want to leave me behind and enter the wilderness alone, then please step on my dead body and get out of this room. Ning Ke looked at the lieutenant who swore to die as if he was returning home, and shook his head helplessly. The Imperial Center Administration and the secret bodyguard were directly under the Imperial Palace, but there was no connection between them. Therefore, the lieutenant did not know his purpose of entering the wilderness. Ning Ke did not care much about the lieutenant's nervous attitude. He was more concerned about how he should enter the wilderness. It had to be safe and convenient for him to retreat. The best way was to break into the palace with thousands of Tang elite cavalries, cross the Hulun Sea and go straight to the desolate man's tribe. However, how could he find the tomes of arcane with thousands of elite cavalries? And how could he hide it from General Xiahou? Riding into the wilderness alone seemed to be a rather heroic choice. However, although he believed that it would be easy for him to survive with his ability and familiarity with the wilderness, this choice was too obvious. It would be too easy for him to become the most obvious target. Riding a black horse with an arrow on his back and straight to the palace alone would obviously tell the spies of the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall in the wilderness and the informants of various forces that he was very powerful, confident and narcissistic. Only the immortal sun was qualified to be so arrogant, confident, and narcissistic. If Ning Ke were to rise on the grassland like a sun, he would attract everyone's attention in the shortest time possible, and then his identity would be found out. All forces knew that he represented the will of the Tang Imperial Court and the Academy. Even if they did not come to kill him, they would have countless ways to trap him somewhere and make him unable to get in touch with what he wanted to get in touch with. The general's mansion of Tiang City did this. Therefore, Ning Ke was guarded by dozens of Tang elite soldiers and could only roam the frontier fortress all day long. At this moment, the lieutenant who was holding the saber on his neck and looking at him solemnly and resolutely did the same. Therefore, Ning Ke could only frown and think of something else when he looked at him. Tell me, what is the best way to enter the wilderness? The lieutenant was stunned and showed a look of grief and indignation on his face. His saber was already on his neck, but His Excellency did not care at all and still insisted on entering the wilderness. Moreover, he even asked him for a way. Could it be that His Excellency would only look at him when his right hand trembled and the blade made a cut on his neck? Ning Ke suddenly thought of the yellow cloth by the lake and stream, and his frown gradually relaxed. He looked up at the lieutenant who was still holding the saber on his neck and said, I have something for you to do. Among the students of the academy who came to the frontier fortress for practice, there is a student named Zhong Dajuan. He is now in Qingshan camp, and I went there with you a few days ago. I want you to find a way to imprison him and not let him have any contact with the outside world. Also, you must do it secretly. Can you do it? The lieutenant held the saber and felt that his neck was a little stiff. He felt that his action was a little funny and answered in distress, it should be no problem, but His Excellency, Ning Ke waved his hand and did not listen to his advice. He said seriously, don't try to stop me in this way. I have never been afraid of dead people, not to mention those who seek death themselves. The lieutenant was disheartened and thought that it was really a great misfortune to have such a cold-hearted superior. Ning Ke looked at his posture of holding the saber and said, You are holding the saber with your right hand. If you want to commit suicide, shouldn't you turn the blade horizontally and place it on the right side of your neck? Only then did the lieutenant realize that there was something wrong with his posture of holding the saber. He lowered his head in shame and ran out of the room with his hands covering his face. Ning Ke shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He reached into his lapel and took out all the waste tokens after a long time. He wondered when he had become a doryman. He had a lot of trump cards and even more waste tokens. The ones given by the Academy, the secret guards, the fish dragon gang, the imperial center administration, and the ones given by third sister Yu Lian were piled densely on the table. They were made of wood, gold, stone, or neither. They were of different colors and luster. How can I make every waste token play its most important role? He looked at the waste token on the table and thought seriously. The waste token of the secret guards was useless on the grassland, but there must be spies of the imperial court in the left king's palace. He could use the waste token of the imperial center administration to order them. If he was really forced, the waste token of the academy would be thrown out like a magic weapon. Aunt Cuny Maddie, who had a high status in the Yueluan kingdom, and Princess Lu Chenjia, who was famous for being infatuated, wanted a hot spring to soak in. It was not an unreasonable request. However, the hot spring had already been occupied by the female disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom. Therefore, this request became unreasonable and caused a dispute, which led to more unreasonable things. They were all cultivators who came to help Yen under the edict of the Westhill Divine Palace. The Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom only sent ordinary disciples, and the Master of Calligrapher did not come. The White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom was led by Aunt Chu. Moreover, the flower addict Lu Chenjia had a well-known relationship with Prince Long Qing of the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall. Therefore, both the Divine Hall and the Yen Kingdom had a clear attitude towards this dispute. Ning Ke defeated the monk of the White Tower Temple and temporarily protected the ownership of the hot spring for the girls of the Great River Kingdom. However, not long after that, an extremely difficult task fell on the group of girls. The countries of the Central Plains decided to negotiate with the left king's palace. In order to show their sincerity and show their benevolence and peace, the Divine Hall's Department of Light called on the countries to collect a batch of food and send it to the wilderness to help the people of the palace get through the winter. Even the most righteous idiot would not do such a stupid thing as keeping a tiger as a skewer. Therefore, the quantity of this batch of food could not be too large. It was only for symbolic purposes. Since it was symbolic, it naturally had to be sent to the palace before the midwinter. However, it was freezing cold and deep into the wilderness. They could encounter the horse gang at any time. It was difficult and dangerous. Especially when the commander of the coalition army was only willing to send a small number of cavalries to escort the food, this task seemed even more terrifying. It was the girls of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom who accepted this task. The girls of the Great River Kingdom followed the cavalries to escort the food to the wilderness. Naturally, they could no longer occupy the beautiful hot spring by the lakeside. No matter what danger they would encounter on the way, it would be their own responsibility. Cat Girl said angrily, "This is too much. We should reprimand the Divine Hall." A female disciple said sadly, "This transfer order may have the intention of the Divine Hall." Cat Girl opened her eyes wide and did not understand her senior sister's words. How could the Haotian Taoist Divine Palace, which was sacred and righteous in the hearts of the believers in the world, do such a thing? Zhuo Zhihua said bitterly, "Prince Long Qing is the future emperor's son-in-law of the Yueluan Kingdom. Who do you think the Divine Hall will support?" Although there is no evidence, we can guess the reason for this transfer order. Aunt Shu of the Yueluan Kingdom has always been very vengeful. But senior brother Zhong is a student of the academy and he is in the Blue Water Battalion of the Dongxing Stockade Village. She can't do anything about it. Of course, she will vent her anger on us. Otherwise, how can she show her arrogance? The girls of the Great River Kingdom by the mountain stream thought of the danger they might encounter on the long journey and were very worried. They all looked at the black-haired girl sitting at the small table in the depths of the yellow cloth. "Hill Master, now that things have come to this, you must stand up and speak. In recent days, I have written it with the greatest perseverance and hard work. Day after day, I am afraid of tomorrow. If I really can't write it, I will tell everyone. If I can write it, I will not say it. I am grateful. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 205. What are you talking about? The black-haired girl didn't turn around. Her tone seemed to be much lower than that of a normal person, so she seemed to be unusually calm, or it could be said that she had no emotions at all. Zhuozhihua and Cat Girl looked at each other and saw the helplessness in each other's eyes. Zhuozhihua took a few steps forward and said in a low voice, "If the Divine Hall knows that Hill Master is here, they won't be so partial to Yueluan." The black-haired girl picked up the brush again and quietly wrote on the table. She said, "Since we have received the Divine Hall's edict to help Yen, it is natural for us to accept the military order and assign tasks. How can we be partial to them?" Zhuozhihua said anxiously, "The palace is deep in the wilderness. With us escorting the provisions, what should we do if we encounter horse gang, rogue soldiers, or even some malicious people?" The black-haired girl dipped the brush in the ink and said softly, "So what?" Zhuozhihua had been with her for many years at the foot of the mountain in the black ink lake. Zhuozhihua knew that this was her character. She was not indifferent, but obsessed with books and ink. She didn't care about most things in the world. However, now the disciples of Black Ink Garden were facing a very dangerous situation. She was the only one who could save the situation, so she couldn't continue to be indifferent. Zhuozhihua clenched her fists slightly and looked at the black hair pouring down her back with a solemn expression. She said, "If Hill Master didn't show up, we might have died in the wilderness. You might have survived, but I would definitely die, and so would the Bobcat girl. Those shameless and insidious villains would be delighted by the news of our deaths. The Yueluan Kingdom, which has always wanted to oppress the people of the Great River Kingdom, might even celebrate." The black-haired girl beside the table slowly put the ink brush back on the inkstone. After a moment of silence, she put her hands into her sleeves and said calmly, "But why will we die?" Zhuozhihua heard that she was still as usual and became more anxious. She said with a bitter smile, "Because we are no match for the enemy." The black-haired girl said calmly, "If all the disciples of the Black Ink Garden are promoted to masters of the see-through realm, or if there is another grand cultivator of the knowing destiny state like you, who would dare to be so rude to us even if we go deep into the wilderness? Who would dare to frame us with such a ridiculous trick?" Zhuozhihua was stunned and didn't know what she meant by saying these words at this time. Because the disciples of Black Ink Garden are not strong enough, they will be bullied. Therefore, they will be afraid of this situation, afraid of death. If we are strong enough, we will not be afraid and will not be bullied. The black-haired girl's voice was as flat and smooth as the thin ice on the surface of a lake. If you want to become strong, you must have the courage to face the trials. Why did no one in the world dare to despise the Chang and Academy? That's because their ordinary students also have to participate in the battlefield training and go to the most dangerous places to accept the test of life and death. When faced with difficult situations, don't always think of asking me to speak up. In the eyes of the world and all of you, perhaps I have an undeserved reputation, but you don't know that in this world, an undeserved reputation is the most powerless thing. Power always lies in power itself, just like how the brush and ink always lie in the brush and ink itself." Cat Girl stood beside Zhuozhihua and looked at the black-haired girl. She couldn't help but frown and ask, "Senior sister, your realm is already so high. Isn't it powerful enough? The upper see-through state. It sounds really good." The black-haired girl said calmly, "Wang Jinglu of the Tang dynasty is known to be invincible below the knowing destiny state. Prince Long Qing is only one step away from the knowing destiny state. Yi Hongyu, the Tao addict, even Prince Long Qing is afraid of her. What is the upper see-through state?" These three people were the strongest in the young generation of the world. She mentioned them indifferently. Although she was warning her fellow disciples, she also revealed an aura that she was naturally qualified to be compared with these three people. Cat Girl listened to these words and stuck out her tongue. She said, "Senior sister, what you said is not reasonable. Even if these three people have a high state, they are just similar to you. If you want to say that they are more powerful, they are only grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state. But the problem is that such grand cultivators are either great divine priests of the divine hall or peerless figures like Uncle Master who founded a sect. Ordinary people can't meet one in their lifetime. How can they be so easy to meet? The little girl's words were right. Grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state were like divine dragons in the world. They were known but could not be met. They occasionally showed their faces in the clouds and instantly hid in the deep mountain courtyards. It was extremely difficult to meet them. However, if Ning Ke heard these words, it would be difficult for him to have any sympathy. He got along with them day and night and often consulted them, such as second brother who carried a wooden club, Pippi who fought with him for crab porridge, Master who stayed in the brothel every day, Chow Shao Shu who floated far away, the nation master, younger brother of the emperor, Professor Huang He, not to mention the headmaster of academy and eldest brother whom he had not met yet. Grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state. What was the difference between them and cabbages everywhere in the field? The black-haired girl had made up her mind. Although the girls of the Great River Kingdom still had many ideas in their minds, they had to keep them and began to prepare for departure. However, standing by the lake, looking at the distant wilderness which was more mysterious and dangerous than before, Zhuo Zhihua could not help but show a worried expression on her face. They came from the south of the mainland and had never been to the wilderness. Whether it was food, climate, geography, or culture, they were all blank. The allied forces of Yan Kingdom had sent guides, but how could those guides be reliable? Who wouldn't be afraid of entering a completely unknown world without any reinforcements or sect backing them up? The young cat girl was more carefree. She was angry at the unfairness of the Divine Hall and the shamelessness of the people of the Yueluan Kingdom, but she was not afraid to enter the wilderness. She believed that as long as senior sister was there, no danger was dangerous. So she still had the leisure to remember the osmanthus cake of Lotus restaurant in Chang'an and the knife light in the snow that day. She trotted along the lake all the way to find Ning Ke to say goodbye. Ning Ke listened to her talk about the situation faced by the disciples of the Black Ink Garden. He was silent for a moment and then looked at the blushing little girl and smiled. There were many emotions hidden in his gentle smile, such as, sure enough, I am so awesome, and so on. Cat girl stared at him and suddenly said, Senior brother, your smile is really scary. Ning Ke was stunned and asked, isn't it very gentle, sincere, kind and simple? Cat girl giggled. The silver bell rang by the lake and shook off a few snowflakes. Ning Ke looked at her and made his smile look more peaceful and casual. He then said calmly and casually, it's really a coincidence that I also have something to do in the wilderness. Cat girl's eyes brightened and looked at him and said, Senior brother, you also want to go to the wilderness? Yes. Cat girl exclaimed with admiration, alone? You are really great. I am very familiar with the wilderness. Ning Ke, who had succeeded in abducting the little girl with the osmanthus cake, smiled slightly and thought that he had been a guide when he left the wilderness last spring. It seemed that he still needed to be a guide when he returned to the wilderness this winter. Although he had guessed that the girls of the Great River Kingdom might be suppressed and ostracized, it was more of luck than analytical ability. Ning Ke was not an immortal who had ascended to heaven, so it was impossible for everything to go according to his plan. Cat girl took him to the campsite of the Black Ink Garden and told Zhuo Zhihua about it. Zhuo Zhihua frowned slightly and looked at Ning Ke in confusion. She asked, Senior brother Zhong, you are a disciple of the academy. It seems to be a little inconvenient. In the novel, if you were going somewhere to do something and suddenly met someone who wanted to go with you, then that person was either a bandit or a fugitive who was looking for someone to take the blame. As long as one had some experience and was not as naive and gullible as Cat Girl, they would feel that there must be some problems hidden in this coincidence. Because Ning Ke was a Tang person whom the Great River Kingdom was willing to get close to, and he was also a student of the academy, and these days he had become familiar with the girls of the Great River Kingdom by exchanging food with each other. That day he even killed the monks of the White Tower Temple to help them out of trouble. Zhuo Zhihua was not willing to associate him with any bad aspects, so she politely refused. Ning Ke asked, why is it inconvenient? Are you worried that the Divine Hall will be unhappy if they know that the Tang people have sneaked in? Zhuo Zhihua slightly bowed her head, indicating that she acquiesced. Ning Ke smiled and said, "Then I will dress up as a disciple of the Black Ink Garden." He looked at the disciples of the Black Ink Garden who were busy packing up not far away and sighed in his heart that the master of calligrapher was so relieved to let such a group of inexperienced boys and girls come to the frontier fortress for experience. Since we are sending grain to the wilderness, I think no one will check whether there is one more person in the team on the way. If my identity is exposed, well, I think the younger brothers and sisters of the Black Ink Garden should be trustworthy. His tone was calm and gentle, but with an irresistible force. This was the skill of words. He directly threw away the question of why he wanted to go and only talked about the problem of going with him, which was equivalent to leaving the basis of the discussion behind. Zhuo Zhihua was speechless and did not know how to answer. She thought that if she did not agree with this seemingly enthusiastic senior brother of the academy, her tone would inevitably be stiff and she might offend him. Ning Ke looked at her with a smile and said, "Any other questions?" At this moment, a calm and stiff voice came from behind the yellow cloth. "The question is why you want to go to the wilderness." The yellow cloth was lifted, and the girl in white slowly walked out. She had black hair and white clothes, and a wide blue cloth belt was tied around her waist, which made her dress more plain and clean. Ning Ke recognized that this was the girl who stood on the branch and looked at the lake in the morning. He did not say anything, but just smiled and bowed with hands folded in front. The girl in white had black hair casually draped over her shoulders, but not a trace of disorder. Under her long and slightly sparse eyelashes, her calm eyes were looking somewhere, as if there was no accurate focus, which made her look a little indifferent. Her white cheeks were slightly round, without any expression, and she seemed to be holding something in her mouth dully. Her thin red lips were pursed into a straight line. No matter in eyebrows, skin color, or expression, this girl could not be called a stunning beauty. However, all of them were extremely beautiful. Ning Ke, who was as short of adjectives as someone, quietly looked at her and thought for a long time. He could only praise her beauty deep in his heart, but really could not find any more accurate words. The most eye-catching thing was her eyes, which did not drift, but no one knew where she was looking at, so she seemed a little dull and a little indifferent. It took Ning Ke a long time to take his eyes back from her eyes, and then he noticed more details. There was a cute pink hairpin in the girl's black hair. Because of the cold weather, the tip of her nose was slightly red. This inexplicable cuteness finally diluted the dull indifference. He repeated the girl's question, "Why do you want to go to the wilderness?" The girl in white looked at him, but also seemed to be looking at the tree behind him, waiting silently. Ning Ke was a little unhappy by some disdain that might be hidden in her eyes, and said, "Why do I want to go?" "Because I am too bored staying in Dongxing Stockade Village." "How about this reason?" This was obviously said in a fit of pique. The white-clothed girl did not get angry. She continued to stare at him, or at the tree behind him. Ning Ke suddenly felt that in this world, besides Sang Sang, there seemed to be another woman who could defeat him. He could not help but shake his head helplessly, and laughed at himself. Of course, this is not a good excuse. I admit this, but I believe that you should also believe that I will not harm you. I am familiar with the wilderness. If I go with you, it will bring you a certain degree of convenience. You help to cover up my identity, which is exactly what I need. So this is a win-win choice. The girl in white finally said the second sentence, but it was essentially no different from the first sentence. Why? Ning Ke said gently, "Our two countries have been on good terms for generations, so it is natural for the Academy and the Black Ink Garden to join hands." The girl's third sentence should be the same question, and there was no change in her expression or tone. Why? Ning Ke looked at her for a long time, and finally gave up. He used his eyes to indicate Zhuo Zhihua to take Cat Girl away. When there were only two of them on the spot, he seriously explained, "The Divine Hall is interested in the wilderness and the desolate man, and the Tang Empire is also interested in these. In this matter, the academy should make its own voice. The girl asked expressionlessly, then why do you hide your identity? Ning Ke helplessly explained, because the academy just wants to take a look. Besides, I am a golden secret agent of the imperial court. Secret agents, of course, have to do things in secret. The second half of the sentence was obviously nonsense, but for some reason, it seemed that this nonsense made the girl in white believe his words. Her slender and slightly sparse eyelashes fluttered, and she continued to ask, what benefits do we have? I represent the academy. Whether it is the Divine Hall or the Yueluan Kingdom, if they want to bully you, they will more or less have scruples. The girl slowly shook her head and said, if you hide your identity, there will be no scruples. After thinking for a moment, Ning Ke looked into her eyes and said, if we are really in a desperate situation, I will naturally not continue to hide my identity. I believe that with the self-esteem of the Black Ink Garden, they will only need my help at that time. The girl slowly moved her eyes away, looking at the trees by the lake or the thin ice on the lake, and said, why should I trust you? Ning Ke answered, the academy is trustworthy. The girl turned back, quietly looked at his chest, and said, okay. How should I address you, girl? Mo Shanshan. Mo Shanshan from Mogan Mountain. Ning Ke thought that the mountain behind the Black Ink Garden was called Mogan Mountain. If the ink was dry, how could the master of calligrapher, Lord Wang, write? Wouldn't the famous calligraphy addict cry? Academy Zhong. For some reason, he did not want the name Zhong Dajuan to come out from the thin lips of the girl in white. He added, I am the 13th, you can call me 13. The girl Mo Shanshan took a step forward, very close to him, and slightly squinted at his face. Ning Ke looked at the beautiful little face close to him, and felt very embarrassed. Looking at the slightest expression of the other party, he was sure that he really did not know who he was. The girl Mo Shanshan nodded, patted his shoulder like an elder, and then turned to leave. He did not know whether she was satisfied or not. There are many first times in this book, Jiang Yi. This chapter is the first time that I try to describe the appearance of a character directly and intuitively. My ability to describe people and things has always been extremely poor. This time I stole a trick, so it is not difficult. I will try to do this more in the future. Finally, today I write it again. Long sigh, please vote for me, we are still first. We are very awesome, the more awesome we are, the better. Good night. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 206. Mo Shanshan was both satisfied and dissatisfied. She was satisfied that Ning Ke didn't know her. Then there would be less noise and trouble. She was dissatisfied that Ning Ke didn't know her, so she had to overturn some of her original ideas. Because of some conflicting feelings, she didn't know what to say. She had to imitate her master's usual behavior, gently patting his shoulder, and then turned away. Looking at her back, Ning Ke thought that this girl from Black Ink Garden was really proud and indifferent to the extreme. Noticing his expression, Cat Girl was worried that he would misunderstand her senior sister and be unhappy. However, it was not convenient for her to explain for her senior sister, so she could only snort angrily and leave. I don't doubt senior brother Zhong's identity as a student of the academy. The other party is from the Chang, an academy, so there should be no problem. But senior brother Zhong is a Tang. He has countless ways to enter the wilderness. He can go with the Yen army or the Tang imperial court's envoy. But he has to hide his identity and follow us into the wilderness. Zhuo Zhihua looked at Mo Shanshan beside her by the fire at night. She slightly frowned and said in a low voice, no matter how he explained to you before, and how many shadows of the Tang imperial court and the academy are behind this, it must be a big deal. The Great River Kingdom is weak, and I'm afraid it will be difficult for them to get out of such a big deal. Cat Girl shook her head and said, what are you afraid of? It must be good to go into the wilderness with the academy. Even if it will bring us trouble, we have the same amulet. Zhuo Zhihua smiled helplessly and rubbed the girl's head. She thought that although the two countries had been on good terms for generations, if it was really a dispute between the Tang Empire and the Divine Hall as she imagined, the amulet might become a fatal amulet. Mo Shanshan, who had been listening quietly, said at this time, "Let him follow my carriage." Hearing this, Cat Girl gently clapped her hands and smiled. She looked at Zhuo Zhihua and comforted her, "Senior sister, what are you afraid of? Even if senior brother Zhong is a master of the second floor of the academy, he won't mess around, right?" Mo Shanshan said softly, "He is not a student of the second floor." "It's really a pity." Cat Girl asked in surprise, "Senior sister, how do you know?" Mo Shanshan looked at the dancing flames on the fire and seemed to be looking further away. She said, "If he is a student of the second floor of the academy, how can he not know my name?" That captain had once questioned how Ning Ke, as a student of the second floor, did not know the secret of the 7 tomes of arcane. Now Mo Shanshan had also expelled him from the second floor of the academy because of his ignorance. If Ning Ke knew this, he would probably be depressed that he only knew how to cultivate in the back mountain of the academy and forgot to ask about these things. The next day, Ning Ke rode the big black horse to the bank of the Blue Lake. The heavy luggage was placed on both sides of the horse's back, making the big black horse shake its head and breathe out hot air. It seemed extremely dissatisfied, but it did not seem to be exhausted. He changed into an ordinary disciple's uniform of black ink garden and put on a bamboo hat to cover most of his face. Ning Ke was still not satisfied, so he took out the mask that Sang Sang sewed by herself from his luggage and put it on carefully. Mo Shanshan walked out from behind the yellow cloth. Today she did not wear the plain white dress, nor did she wear the wide blue belt around her waist. Like other girls from the Great River Kingdom, she wore a plain wide skirt and a bamboo hat with a veil hanging on the top of her head. Her beautiful eyebrows and eyes were all hidden behind the veil and could not be seen clearly. Both of them wished they could change their faces and make themselves the most inconspicuous. However, they had seen each other's true faces, so they suddenly found that the other had the same idea as them. They could not help but feel a little strange. The two looked at each other and did not speak. Then they brushed past each other. At that moment, Ning Ke noticed that the girl's gaze hidden behind the veil did not completely fall on him. He could not help but frown, thinking that she actually wanted to show her disdain to him through the veil. He snorted in his heart and thought that even Prince Long Qin was not his opponent in pretending to be lonely and indifferent. "You are such a good young girl, don't even think of using this kind of gaze to hit me." After the disciples of Black Ink Garden finished organizing their troops, they marched towards the east and came to the side of the coalition camp. From the logistics department, they received the rations from the Central Plains to assist the left king's palace. The people of the Central Plains Coalition Army and the Yueluan Kingdom were very clear that the real difficulties and dangers would appear after entering the wilderness. Therefore, they did not encounter any twists and turns or any difficulties. 200 yen cavalries, more than 100 civilian workers who were driving the carriages, and a dozen disciples of Black Ink Garden from the Great River Kingdom left the frontier fortress in such a simple manner. Accompanied by the winter wind and the fake morning sun, they walked into the cold and vast wilderness. The Yen cavalries escorting the grain team moved forward silently. The civilian workers who were driving the grain carriages looked uneasy or numb. The disciples of Black Ink Garden spread out to guard the surroundings. Other than the grain carriages, there were also 2 horse carriages that belonged to Black Ink Garden. Mo Shanshan was in one of the carriages, while Ning Ke rode on the big black horse and followed closely behind. After traveling for more than 10 miles, the military camp behind them had long disappeared. He took off the conical hat on his head and looked at the snow that had accumulated in the withered yellow grass. Hearing the shrill cry of an eagle that came from somewhere, his eyes that were exposed outside the mask had a gleam of joy. He had not seen such a familiar scenery for a long time. Even the slight pain caused by the cold air entering his lungs made him feel as if he had returned home. For the next few days, there was nothing much to be done. The troop that was moving slowly on the wilderness could also drag out a large amount of dry dust. It was quite imposing. They did not encounter any blind horse bandits or wandering soldiers, nor did they encounter any strange things. Since the Divine Hall had assigned such a difficult task to the Black Ink Garden, they had intended to make things difficult for them. On the surface, they had done it well. The highest authority of the grain delivery team was also given to the Black Ink Garden. The 200 yen cavalries and grain wagons had to listen to the orders of these girls. When Commander Ning Kei came to the side of the horse carriage and said a few words to Mo Shanshan through the window, the originally arranged Yen army guide was officially laid off. The route of the troops, the choice of camp, and the arrangement of time were all decided by him. Under his command, the troops walked strictly along the surrounding hills of the Kidney Sea. Even though they could not find water every day, at least they could ensure an adequate supply of firewood. The troops set up camp very early every day. Just after noon, Ning Kei requested to find a campsite and began to prepare to rest. The leader of the Yen cavalries once raised an objection. He thought that the distance they traveled each day was too short. According to the current speed, it would be too late by the time the grain team reached the palace. It was not a big deal if the tribes and herdsmen starved to death, but if it affected the negotiation between the Divine Hall and the palace, it would be a real problem. The girls from the Great River Kingdom did not care about the leader's objection. In their opinion, since the Hill Master had decided to let the senior brother of the academy take charge, they should just listen to him. There was no need to say so much. As long as they could enter the wilderness safely and return happily, they did not care whether the Divine Hall would be angry or not. Even though it was winter in the wilderness, it was not too cold yet. The withered grass, barnyard branches, and snow along the way looked boring, but to these girls from the south, it was still a fresh journey. Even though Ning Kei had never been to the wilderness east of Min Mountain, this kind of scenery and this kind of journey were not fresh at all. He had done it countless times, such as giving directions, setting up camp, feeling the wind direction, and looking at animal dung. Most of the time, he rode the big black horse slowly and freely. The big black horse's bridle was specially made, so it could freely lower its head and nibble the grass while walking. His body and soul were also specially made. In this silent and boring journey, he calmly felt the cold heaven and earth, looking for the inspiration to break the realm. Occasionally, he would take Cat Girl to shoot a few gazelles, improving the lives of others. What a beautiful winter scenery of the wilderness. What a beautiful sightseeing trip in the wilderness. Before and after Ning Kei entered the wilderness disguised as a disciple of the Black Ink Garden, there were many powerhouses from the Central Plains who entered this mysterious and difficult territory. Among these powerhouses, there were powerhouses from the border army of the Tang Empire, monks from the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom, men from the Sword Garret of the South Jin Kingdom, and executioners from the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall who were known for being cold-blooded and serious. Prince Long Qing was naturally the best of these powerhouses. At this moment, no one knew where he was standing in the wilderness, what scenery he was looking at, and what kind of thoughts he was thinking about. But not many people knew that the real ruler of the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall, the powerhouse who suppressed Prince Long Qing to the point that he could hardly breathe, had already received the order of the great divine priest of judgment and entered the wilderness alone a few months ago. As the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, who was recognized as the most diligent and powerful among the 3 addicts in the world, was now standing on the top of a meadow outside the white cloth of the left king's palace, looking at the night sky in the north with no expression. No one knew what she was thinking at this time, but it must be that she disdained to think about the whereabouts of Prince Long Qing and his subordinates. Let's go back a few months to the scene when she just left the Peach Mountain of West Hill. Her red dress floated out of the magnificent Taoism temple like a gorgeous cloud of fire. The great divine priest of judgment sat indifferently on the throne carved from the whole piece of South Sea black jade. He slowly moved his eyes back from the bead curtain, closed his eyes, and whispered, "How is the great divine priest of light now?" The priest standing respectfully below the throne heard the words, "Great divine priest of light," and his body suddenly stiffened. He lowered his head and replied, as usual, he recites the doctrines and classics every day. It seems, there is nothing unusual. The Peach Mountain of West Hill was also known as the Divine Mountain. On the south side of the mountain facing the sun, thousands of pink peach trees bloomed. The Taoism temple hidden between the peach trees grew higher and higher, appearing extremely magnificent and solemn. On the other side of the mountain was a precipitous cliff. The smooth boulder looked as if it had been carved out by a god. There were almost no cracks or soil. Not to mention peach blossoms, even a weed could not survive on it. Even weeds with the most stubborn vitality could not stand firm on the rock walls, but humans could. Countless years ago, the most devout believers of Hautian Taoism, under the inspiration of fanatical worship, used the most primitive tools and the most primitive methods, and forcibly dug dozens of steep stone paths through the cliff with their own hands. In the process of building these stone paths, countless people fell off the cliff, and their corpses were hard to find. But in the end, the believers still did what they wanted to do. This was probably the real reason why human beings were superior to all things in the world. The middle-aged priest walked slowly on the steep stone path. The huge cliff seemed to be like the collapse of the sky. It seemed to give people a huge pressure. Even in front of the throne of the great divine priest of judgment, he could still stand a little straight, but he completely bent down on the stone path, almost like an ant crawling on the stone path. Walking along the steep stone path along the huge zigzag for a long time, the middle-aged priest finally walked to the depths of the cliff behind the Peach Mountain. This place had been surrounded by clouds all day long. There was no sunlight all day long, and it was difficult to see 5 fingers. He could only feel the wetness around him and the sound of water coming from somewhere. There was a door in the depths of the fog. The middle-aged priest stood in front of the door silently for a moment, and then pushed the door open and entered. Behind the door was a gloomy world. A faint smell of blood reverberated in the dry passage. The dim yellow light shone on the iron wall, adding a strange and heavy feeling to the complicated and beautiful fu lines on the wall. This was the Yu prison, a place that millions of Hautian believers had never heard of. This place was responsible for detaining the remnants of the devil's doctrine sinners who were judged as heretics by the West Hill Divine Palace. Only those sinners who were so sinful that even burning could not cleanse their filth were qualified to be locked up here. Hautian Taoism had been established on the Peach Mountain for many years. In this long time, none of the sinners who were locked up in the Yu prison had ever been able to escape. This was because those who were powerful enough to escape from the Yu prison would not be captured alive by the Divine Hall. If they could not escape, they would never be able to escape. They could only live in the darkness and isolation from Hautian, painfully and helplessly for the rest of their lives. The middle-aged priest walked silently in the dim passage with his head down. He walked for a long time, but the passage seemed endless. It was not until the passage seemed to pass through the entire holy mountain that a wooden fence appeared. This wooden fence looked ordinary and was not made of any precious wood. There was no fu written by a divine talisman master on it. The gap between the wooden bars was very wide, wide enough for a person to walk out. However, it was precisely this wooden fence that imprisoned a certain someone for 14 years. The middle-aged priest lifted his robe and knelt in front of the wooden fence. He kowtowed 3 times to the old man with withered hair behind the fence, and said with a trembling voice, "Greetings, great divine priest." The old man behind the fence was reading a Hautian scripture in his hand. He turned around when he heard the voice. The old man's cheeks were very thin, and his expression was peaceful and peaceful. His deep eye sockets were enshrouded with holy light. The light was so peaceful and pure, without any impurities or filth. It was as if it could see through everything in the world and see the darkness between the appearance and the heart of everyone. It was incomparably bright. I don't know if I have time to write it tomorrow. If there is no annual leave announcement, I will try to write one more chapter before I go home. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 207. Haotian was the supreme and the only faith in this world. Countless believers in the world devoutly worship the Haotian Taoism temples all over the world with their spirit and money. The Divine Hall located in the Peach Mountain of West Hill was the supreme center that influenced and even controlled these temples and the secular imperial power. The West Hill Divine Palace was led by the Hierarch Lord, and the affairs of the Haotian Taoism were managed by 3 great divine priests. These 3 great divine priests were extremely powerful and dignified, so they were called great gods. The 3 gods were the great divine priest of revelation, the great divine priest of judgment, and the great divine priest of light. Among them, the great divine priest of judgment was in charge of adjudicating heresy and arresting the remnants of the devil's doctrine. There were countless strong men under his command. He was the most powerful and had the most power on the surface. The great divine priest of revelation was in charge of comprehending the will of Haotian. He edited the classics and controlled all the Taoist temples in the world with the 7-fan calligraphy. He had a great influence in the secular world. The great divine priest of light was the most special existence among the 3 gods. He did not have specific distribution of Haotian Taoism's affairs, but he had the power to touch all the affairs of Haotian Taoism. That was because anyone who could become the great divine priest of light must be the most proficient in the doctrine of the Divine Hall, with the strongest belief and the most sensitive to the darkness of the world. 1,000 years ago, the great divine priest of light brought us certain tomes of arcane into the wilderness to preach. It could be said that he bore the most arduous and important historical mission of Haotian Taoism. One could imagine his status. No one knew why the great divine priest of light gave up Haotian's divine favor and created his own sect. He created a devil's doctrine in the world and fought against Haotian Taoism until today. Even though it was severely suppressed by the West Hill Divine Palace, it was still not defeated. One could imagine how powerful it was. The successive great divine priests of light of the West Hill Divine Palace were all great figures. Therefore, although there was no ranking within the Divine Hall, the great divine priest of light was the head of the 3 gods, just below the hierarch. Over the years, there were occasionally letters of authorization issued in the name of the 3 divine priests of West Hill. However, no one outside of Peach Mountain knew that the respected great divine priest of light was imprisoned by the Divine Hall in the secluded prison at the foot of Peach Mountain. Moreover, he had been imprisoned for 14 years. The middle-aged priest kneeling in front of the wooden fence could hardly suppress the excitement in his heart. Over the years, he was the only one in the world who often saw the old man behind the wooden fence, but every time he saw him, he was as excited as the first time he saw the old man. Now, he was the most trusted subordinate of the great divine priest of judgment. Even the 2 priests, Yi Hongyu and Prince Long Qing, would not underestimate him. However, no matter how high his status was, as long as he walked into the Dimyu prison and came to the wooden fence, he felt as if he was still the young man who had just come to Peach Mountain from the Song Taoist Temple in the East Sea, and the old man behind the fence was still the high status and beloved great divine priest of light. The middle-aged priest believed in Haotian and yearned for the light. He was willing and only willing to devote all his love and reverence to the old man who had guided him onto the bright path, even at the cost of his life and soul. The old man looked at the middle-aged divine priest calmly. The wrinkles on his face were as dense as the wood grain on the fence. The expression on his face was extremely gentle. There was no trace of the wisdom and majesty of the great divine priest of light in the past. The middle-aged priest touched his forehead to the ground and said softly, "The great divine priest of judgment asked, so I came to see you." The old man said, "Even if you don't come to see me, I still want to see you." The middle-aged priest was shocked and said in a trembling voice, "Great divine priest, what did you see?" The old man slowly turned around and looked out from the tiny glass hole in the room. Outside the hole was a deep fog and no sunlight could be seen, but he knew that it was the north. The holy light in the old man's sunken eye sockets gradually dissipated. The black pupil was strangely enlarged and occupied the entire eyeball, looking like a transparent black jade without a speck of dust. "I saw the shadow of the night appear in Chang'an City." Hearing this, the middle-aged priest who was kneeling outside the wooden fence trembled. The great divine priest of light, who had been imprisoned for many years, was still the great divine priest of light. Every word he said naturally had its own reason. For the middle-aged divine priest, there was almost no difference from the will of Haotian. The great divine priest of light did not have the ability to predict the operation of all things in the world. That was the God-given ability of the great divine priest of revelation. But as a priest with the purest and firmest Taoist heart and light in every hair and drop of blood, he had a very special ability to see the real darkness of the world. Many years ago, he once saw the shadow of the night floating from the wilderness to the Tang Empire. It was because he firmly believed in this that the Westhill Divine Palace did so many things in that powerful empire in the north at all costs. However, it was very strange that because of that incident, he, who had a high position in the Divine Hall, was instantly beaten down to the dust. Facing the wrath of the Hierarch Lord, especially the gaze of the Taoist in indigo, as powerful as he was and as intelligent as he was, he could not do anything to resist. Thus, he became an unknown prisoner in the foothills of Peach Mountain. The middle-aged priest asked for instructions in a trembling voice. This matter should be reported to the great divine priest of judgment, no, the Hierarch Lord. The old man looked at him with a smile and shook his head, saying, "This hall." With a faint sigh, the dust on the fence flew up. "And the temple at the back of the hall, it has already fallen and decayed." The great divine priest of light, who had been imprisoned for many years for no reason, had the right to coldly criticize the divine hall and even the Taoist temple. However, although the middle-aged priest respected him, he did not dare to reply. He raised his head and after a moment of confusion, he could not hide his excitement and said in a trembling voice, "Are you leaving?" The old man looked at him quietly. His sunken eye sockets had returned to their original state, and the holy radiance made his eyes look indifferent and hollow. His dry lips trembled slightly, and he said emotionlessly, "You will die. Many people will die. There are many people in the divine hall like me who are willing to give up their lives." The middle-aged priest did not hesitate and said firmly, "For the light to come to the world." After being imprisoned for 14 years, he finally decided to escape the prison of the divine hall because of the darkness he saw. The old man quietly looked at the middle-aged priest who was kneeling outside the fence. It was as if he was seeing the young Taoist priest whose eyes were full of awe and worship many years ago. The wrinkles on his face became deeper and deeper, filled with compassion and compassion. One night, the old man got up and walked to the row of seemingly loose and low wooden fences. He quietly looked at the fence and looked at it for a long time, which he had accompanied for 5,000 days and nights. Then he said one sentence. "I have no confinement in my heart. How can the confinement stop me? My Taoist heart is bright. How can the light stop me?" After saying this, the old man reached out and pushed the wooden fence. His action was ordinary and casual, as if he was not trying to get rid of the years of confinement, but just wanted to leave home and push open the creaking wooden door. The old man's fingers touched the wooden fence. The wooden fence silently broke into powder and turned into countless shining dust particles that drifted everywhere. Then, like a group of fireflies, they drilled out of the small stone hole. The great divine priest of judgment, who was quietly sitting on the South Sea seat of heavenly black jade with his hand supporting his chin, suddenly stiffened. Two tiny specks of light suddenly appeared in his majestic eyes that were as deep as the sea. Puff! Thick blood spurted from his lips and dripped on the dark red divine robe. The fireflies drilled out of the small stone hole and entered the night fog. Like pouring oil into a fire, they ignited everything around them, especially the tiny particles in the haze. The dark valley that had never seen light suddenly burned. This kind of burning had no heat or destructive power, only brightness. The burning mountain fog instantly spread up to the south of Peach Mountain and among the Taoist temples. In the deep night, the whole Peach Mountain was burning. Especially the divine hall of light, in which Taoist chanting echoed, solemn and compassionate, shining. At the highest point of Peach Mountain, there was a pure white divine hall. A thunder-like roar sounded in the divine hall. With the thunder-like roar, the invisible flame between Peach Mountain was gradually extinguished. The roar in the highest divine hall gradually became lower. The ending sound was lingering. The ending sound was faint. There was an island far away in the southeast. The storm in this ocean was more terrible than in the storm sea. No fishing boats or merchant ships had ever come here. There had never been human footprints on this island before. A skinny Taoist dressed in green stood on a high reef. The terrible waves kept hitting the bottom of the reef, making a thunder-like sound. The island was shaking, but he seemed to feel nothing. The Taoist in indigo quietly looked at the depths of the ocean, watching the hot fog that was evaporated by the lava of the underwater volcano. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and turned his head to look at the distant land that he could not see. After a long time, the Taoist in indigo sighed and shook his head. That night, 14 divine priests in Peach Mountain turned into ashes in the light. That night, a total of 300 people from the Divine Hall of Light were executed. That night, the great divine priest of light, who had been imprisoned for 14 years, successfully escaped from the West Hill Divine Palace. He was the first prisoner in history to leave the U prison behind Peach Mountain alive. Dusk was the warmest time in the wilderness in winter. The red sunset hanging over the long grass in the distance emitted the last light of the day. Although it could not melt the snow, it could add some redness to the cheeks of travelers. The sound of arrows whistling and heavy objects falling sounded in the wilderness. People in the camp heard Cat Girl's surprised shout from afar, "Senior brother, your archery is so good." Someone went to clean up the prey. Ning Kai fed the big black horse and was ready to rest for a while. When he passed by the carriage, he found Emo Shanshan beside the window, concentrating on writing in the last afterglow. "Be careful of hurting your eyes." He stood beside the window and said kindly. Emo Shanshan looked up at him coldly, as if he was air. Ning Kai had been in the wilderness for some days and found that the girl was so proud that she never looked at him directly. He was a little unhappy and thought that he did not even care about the pride of the Tang princess. How could he be defeated by her? So he did not bother to look at her directly. He leaned against the window and squinted to see her writing. His eyes did not fall on the paper, but on her face. He found that her slightly round face was full of concentration and forgetfulness. Ning Kai agreed that she was the most beautiful when she was serious. Once he picked up the brush, he often forgot everything around him. So when he saw the girl concentrating on writing calligraphy, his impression of her inevitably improved. "I didn't know that you are a guy who is obsessed with books. Your writing is quite similar to my style." The young men of the Great River Kingdom were doing physical work, putting up tents and nailing stakes. Zhuo Zhihua and other female disciples were piling firewood to make a fire and cooking. Hearing Ning Kai's comments, they did not know why they laughed. They covered their mouths and looked at Ning Kai, but did not say why they laughed. Ning Kai was a little embarrassed. To cover up this embarrassment, he looked up at the sky and found that a few grain-sized stars appeared on the edge of the wilderness, looking at the sunset across the sky. He subconsciously sighed, "There is still no moon." Inside the window, Emo Shanshan put down the brush on the inkstone and followed his gaze. She asked dully, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Ning Kai was slightly startled and thought of something. A smile gradually appeared on his cheeks. Emo Shanshan looked at his side face through the window. The breeze on the wilderness blew his hair and a lovely little dimple vaguely appeared. She suddenly found that this guy's smile at this time was so sincere and sincere. Suddenly, Ning Kai put his palm on the window and his body swept up and disappeared. A light sound came from the top of the horse carriage. Emo Shanshan looked up and did not understand what it meant. In the wind of the wilderness, Ning Kai stood on the top of the horse carriage and looked at the smoke gradually rising under the round sunset in the distance. He gradually frowned and put his hand between his lips to blow a sharp whistle. The camp suddenly became quiet, and the war horses began to stir. Accompanied by the setting sun, Sang Sang ate noodles with fried eggs alone with relish. There was not a single green onion in the noodles because she did not like to eat green onion. The reason why she used to put green onion was that someone liked it. She put on Shenjinji Cosmetic Store's powder in front of the mirror alone, and there would not be someone who always laughed at her. She slept alone, rolling from left to right and from right to left. The bed seemed much bigger. On the bed, she kicked her legs and stretched her arms as she wanted. She no longer worried about who she would kick or hit. Living alone in Chang'an City was very comfortable, but also very uncomfortable. Sang Sang lay on the bed and looked at the tree outside the window. She looked at the stars in the leaves and wondered why there was still no moon. What was the moon that the young master mentioned? Where was the young master at this time? Maybe because the bed suddenly became bigger and she was not used to it, Sang Sang did not sleep well all night like the previous days. She tossed and turned until dawn. She got up with a yawn and rubbed her face. She pushed the door open and went to the alley to buy a bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup. Then she sat on the threshold of the old brush pen shop. In the bright light of the early morning, she ate alone, tasteless. It was noisy at Yangguan, the southernmost part of the Tang Empire. Countless caravans were waiting to enter the country. There was an ordinary horse carriage lined up according to the rules. In the carriage, there was an old man with withered hair and deep eyes resting. He opened his eyes and looked to the distant Chang'an City in the north. His eyes were full of gentle and dignified light. Corrected a small mistake, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 208. The Southern Gate Temple at the foot of the imperial city was quiet, even a little lonely. Taoists and nuns walked quietly, occasionally looking up at the young Taoist standing outside the temple, and then quickly lowering their heads. The young Taoist was holding a yellow umbrella under his arm, and his face was calm and gentle. He was He Mingqi, the first disciple of the nation master of Tang. Everyone in the Southern Gate Temple knew that He Mingqi was a gentle and kind person. However, for someone of his status to personally guard the door, one could imagine how important the conversation in the temple was. No one dared to make a sound and disturb him. Deep in the temple, there were two beautiful cotton cushions on the black wooden board. Nation Master Li Qingshan looked at Master Yen Sei and said slowly, "Senior brother, that person should be coming to Chang'an." In front of the emperor and his respected senior brother, Li Qingshan would habitually return to his playful appearance. However, today his expression was extremely serious, and there was a hint of serious inquiry on his face. Master Yen Sei took a deep look at him, and there was no usual wretchedness in his deep-set eyes, but some hidden sadness. He said indifferently, "It was not easy for the great divine priest to escape from that dark place. Why does he come to Chang'an? Who is he looking for, or is he courting death?" Li Qingshan smiled bitterly and said, "The great divine priest of light of the divine hall, the second most powerful person in Peach Mountain. Such a person. Even if he comes to Chang'an to court death, he will surely shock the whole world." After a moment of silence, Master Yen Sei said, "The reason. I want to know why he comes." Li Qingshan took out a very thin letter from his arms, and put it on the black floor. He said, "According to the speculation of the hierarch lord, it should be related to the thing that happened 14 years ago." Master Yen Sei slightly frowned, and did not continue this topic. It seemed that even the two brothers did not want to talk about the thing that happened 14 years ago. What does this letter say? When he escaped from the divine hall, he used some means to easily push down the confinement. The great divine priest of judgment's Taoist heart was tied to the confinement, and he was badly injured by the backfire. Other divine priests and Taoists were also killed or injured. The temple has deduced that he will come to the empire, so they hope that we can capture or kill him at all costs. Li Qingshan noticed that his senior brother's eyes seemed to sink deeper after hearing this. He paused for a while and continued in a low voice, the letter also said that the great divine priest of revelation has led the masters of the Revelation Institute to the border ahead of time. As long as the imperial court agrees, they are willing to come to Chang'an City to assist us. If it weren't for the fact that the judicial department was injured and most of its power was invested in the wilderness, the Revelation Institute wouldn't have to deal with this matter. However, I really didn't expect that my old friend, who had been imprisoned for so many years, was still alive. Instead, he seemed to be getting brighter and brighter. If it weren't for the current situation, with his ability, he might really be able to find the hand scroll of the tomes of arcane for the divine hall. It was hard to tell whether Master Yen Sei was praising or sighing. Hearing the words, tomes of arcane, Li Qingshan slightly raised his eyebrows and said, the wilderness is already in turmoil, but the hand scroll has been lost for a long time. Perhaps it is not even in the desolate man's tribe. Therefore, all parties only send the younger generation to try to find it. Senior brother, if your old friend reappears in the world, he will be much more important than the other side. Master Yen Sei shook his head and did not continue to discuss this issue. He asked, what did His Majesty say? At the beginning of His Majesty's ascension to the throne, when the imperial court was handing over to the man did such a thing in Chang'an City. His Majesty had long wanted him dead. But His Majesty's attitude was very clear. Even if he had to be killed, it could only be done by the empire itself. People from the Divine Hall were absolutely not allowed to enter the country and intervene. Li Qingshan looked at Master Yen Sei and said after a moment of silence, Senior brother, you were very close to him at that time. You'd better leave this matter to me. Master Yen Sei shook his head and said expressionlessly, since it is a matter of Haotian Taoism, there is no reason to ask the academy for help. But it is impossible to kill him with the power of the South School and the Imperial Center administration. Li Qingshan said, you can't judge things in the world only by impressions. Nothing is impossible. Master Yen Sei looked at him and said directly, he used to be stronger than you. I believe he is stronger now than before. Li Qingshan smiled and said, there were several very interesting stories recorded in the Huayang market of the South School. There was once a knowing destiny grand cultivator from the South Jin Kingdom who was traveling in the Great River Kingdom. As a result, he was killed by a rascal who was greedy for money. Master Yen Sei knew what he wanted to express and could not help frowning. Li Qingshan filled the teacup in front of his senior brother and said with a smile, although I am not talented, I also entered the knowing destiny realm many years ago. As the nation master of Tang, I am much stronger than that rascal. Above the great god's throne and under the firmament. Master Yen Sei looked at Li Qingshan and said slowly, Junior brother, you have to remember this sentence. Anyone who can sit on the three great divine thrones in the Peach Mountain is qualified to stand under the firmament and overlook the secular world. In Haotian Taoism, the hierarch's position is the most noble. But in terms of Taoist heart cultivation, the hierarch is not necessarily much stronger than the three great divine thrones. But the person you are determined to kill is the great divine priest of light, who is known for his wisdom and Taoist heart. Li Qingshan smiled and said nothing more. Yen Sei knew that he did not really listen to these words. He could not help but sigh in the bottom of his heart. Thinking of the temperament of his old friend, he shook his head and said, do your best. If it is not easy, don't worry about it. All the fate, Haotian will arrange it. After Li Qingshan left, Master Yen Sei sat on the black wooden floor and was in a daze for a long time. His old and thin body looked more lonely against the cold pillars and floor. After a long time, he picked up the cold tea in front of him, dipped his finger in the tea, and wrote a word on the floor. Then he reached out his hand to the greasy and dirty Taoist robe and wiped it clean. Then he got up and left. The tea marks on the black wooden floor gradually disappeared, leaving only some very light water stains. If you looked carefully, you could vaguely see that it should be the word chaos. The old man's name was Wei Guangming. It was not because the old man was the great divine priest of light. In fact, more than 80 years ago, shortly after he was born, He got such a name when he was still a baby. After having this name for decades, he became the great divine priest of light and enjoyed the love and awe of millions of believers in the world. At that time, he understood that it was not only a drink and a peck, but also a name contained the will of heaven. If Haotian did not make a choice before he was born, how could his parents, who had been farmers for generations in the kingdom of Song, take out such a name? As the most respected great divine priest of light of Haotian Taoism, although the old man had been imprisoned for more than 10 years, there were still countless priests and powerhouses in the divine hall who were willing to sacrifice everything for him. There were also countless loyal subordinates in various Taoist temples in the world. Now that he had escaped from the Fan prison at the foot of Peach Mountain, there were naturally people who helped him to come to Chung and quietly. Getting off the carriage outside the great city, the old man walked along the deep and thick south gate. With drooping eyes and bent body, he slowly walked forward on the stone road. Suddenly, he seemed to feel something. The moment his right foot stepped on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, it slightly stiffened, and then he took it back and turned to the east. In the eyes of the passers-by, the old man was just a little inconvenient in his legs. They did not notice anything strange, nor did they know that at the moment when the old man's right foot was about to step on the street, the vermilion bird painting deeply engraved on the stone ground far away from the Vermilion Bird Avenue slowly opened its eyes. After a long time, the eyes of the vermilion bird painting slowly closed again. What a big array! The old man smiled and thought to himself as he walked slowly on the streets of the East City with his hands behind his back. After a while, the old man slowly walked beside a well in an alley. His indifferent and muddy eyes fell on a withered yellow leaf beside the well, and his brows gradually furrowed. The leaf was withered and yellow, and the veins were still there. It looked normal, but in the eyes of the old man, it was extremely unusual. In his eyes that could see all the darkness in the world, all the sceneries, street scenes, and life in the city seemed to be covered with a very thin layer of gauze. It did not cover the truth, but covered the fate that circulated between heaven and earth. The old man walked to the inconspicuous inn at the end of the alley with his hands behind his back. He shook his head and thought with emotion, what a big array. The big array of Chang and city had not been activated, but it had already covered the mystery of heaven, so that the old man could not see the dark shadow that he had been chasing for 14 years. However, the big array that made him admire and vigilant did not find out that he was a peerless powerhouse from the West Hill, and did not give any warning. Because he was not the great divine priest of light now. He had restrained all his aura and ability, and even completely forgotten his Taoist heart. Now he was just a very ordinary skinny old man. He picked an ordinary inn to stay in. In the following days, he walked around Chang and city with his hands behind his back and his body hunched. He went to some ordinary places of interest, went to some ordinary markets, ordered some ordinary dishes, drank some ordinary fragrant jasmine, and listened to some ordinary folk songs. He spent some ordinary winter time like the most ordinary old man in Chang and city. Until the winter gradually came and the coldness became stronger, he went to buy an ordinary thick cotton-padded jacket. An ordinary old man did not need too much sleep. One morning, he got up when the sky was just bright. He wandered around casually and came across a stall selling hot and sour noodle slice soup. He smelled the fragrance and bought a bowl. When he left, someone knocked over the front of his cotton-padded jacket. A little girl came over with a food box and looked at the embarrassed old man expressionlessly. She pulled out a big towel from her sleeve like a magic trick and wiped the stain for him. Then she bought another bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup for him. The old man thanked her, but she shook her head, indicating that there was no need. Then she left with the food box. The old man was stunned. He handed the bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup in his hand to an old beggar from the Yen kingdom who was thinner than him. Then he followed the little girl from a distance. The old man followed the little girl to an alley called Lin 47th Street and saw a small shop called Old Brush Pen Shop. He watched the little girl working hard in the shop for a whole day. The more the old man looked at her, the more he felt that the little girl was fresh and delightful. She was extremely clean from her appearance to her temperament, like an absolutely transparent glass bead. As long as there was a little sunshine, it would definitely shine brightly. The little girl's skin was a little dark, but it was also so clean and bright. So the great divine priest of light from West Hill stood in Lynn 47th Street and couldn't help admiring her with joy. It's been a long time. Brothers and sisters, I'm tired. I've had 10 days off. I'm not qualified to complain, so I can only talk about my thoughts. There are some problems with the internet at home, so I haven't been online these days. I'm a few days late. I sincerely wish everyone a happy new year and a healthy family. Finally, a more sincere thank you. Finally, I must add that I haven't updated for 10 days. I just entered the upload password for half an hour. Half an hour. I'm so, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 209. In the following days, the great divine priest of light, disguised as an ordinary old man in Chang'an, went to the inn, ate, slept, enjoyed the scenery, drank tea, listened to music, and took a nap. Every day, he would stroll around the Lin 47th Street and see Sang Sang. He saw Sang Sang when he ate, slept, drank tea, listened to music, and took a nap. He went to see Sang Sang every day. After finding out the name of the skinny little handmaiden in the old brush pen shop, seeing Sang Sang became the most important part of his life. One day, the old man came to the Lin 47th Street again with 2 bags of osmanthus cakes from the Farong store. Seeing the little handmaiden being picked up by a royal carriage, he could not help but feel curious, but did not think much about it. Looking at the closed door of the old brush pen shop and not seeing Sang Sang's busy body, the old man felt something was missing and regretful. After standing there for a while, he suddenly remembered that he had forgotten the real purpose of coming to Chang'an. The shadow of the dark night had long disappeared from the old man's eyes. He did not know where that person was hiding in Chang'an or whether he was still in Chang'an. He had even completely forgotten about it these days. Standing on the gray wall of the Lin 47th Street, he thought of it and shook his head. He put the osmanthus cakes in front of the old brush pen shop and tightened his dirty thick cotton-padded jacket. Then he passed through the cobweb-like streets of the eastern city and came to a quiet mansion in the southern city. 2 large locust trees stood quietly at the entrance of the alley. Their leaves fluttered weakly in the winter wind. Compared to the lofty trees peeking out from the houses on both sides of the alley, they looked a little shabby. There were 2 mansions facing each other in the middle of the alley. The old man did not pay attention to the mansion on his right, but looked directly to his left. The broken seal had long been torn clean by the wind, leaving only some scraps of paper mixed in between the peeling paint of the wooden door. It looked extremely dilapidated. The old man stood quietly in front of the shabby mansion gate with his hands behind his back and his body bent. He looked at the remaining stone lion and the old mud that had accumulated behind the base of the stone lion. An indescribable emotion appeared in his sunken eyes. The old man stood there for a long time until a gust of winter wind blew in from the entrance of the alley and entered the collar of his thick cotton-padded jacket. He coughed a few times and his body bent even lower. A voice came along with the winter wind. The winter in Chang'an this year is much colder than before. The old man still stooped and replied, I haven't been to Chang'an city for many years, so I don't know what the winter in Chang'an city was like before. Then, he turned to look at the entrance of the alley. A man walked slowly from the entrance of the alley. His eyebrows were straight like a ruler and his eyes were bright like a spring. He wore a cotton Taoist robe and a simple Taoist bun. He carried a long sword on his back and wore a pair of straw sandals. Every step he took was like a dragon or a tiger. The fallen leaves and mud in front of him seemed to be afraid of his power. They moved even though there was no wind and moved to the sides of the alley. It was the great Tang Empire's nation advisor, Li Qingshan. You can stay in Chang'an for the next few years. Maybe you will have a deeper understanding of the winter here. Li Qingshan stopped and looked at the old man. He wanted to keep the guest. If he was a real guest, the Tang Empire would have good tea and wine to entertain him. If he came uninvited and had years of resentment, the so-called keep the guest meant something else. The old man looked at him quietly and slowly straightened up. His stooped and thin body suddenly became tall and mighty with a simple straightening movement. A sense of solemnity and wisdom gushed out. Facing the nation master of Tang, the old man was no longer the ordinary old man who drank tea, ate and looked at Sang Sang. He was the great divine priest of light. The leader of the South School of Haotian Taoism, the nation master of Tang, and almost all the people's imagination about power could be given to Li Qingshan. No one had seen him in a wonderful state these years. Because of his extraordinary status, there was really nothing that he needed to do in person. But even the children playing in the streets of Chang'an city knew that the nation master was naturally very powerful. Otherwise, how could he become the nation master? For people in the cultivation world, the nation master of Tang Li Qingshan was a master in the knowing destiny state. Once he made a move, he would definitely cause a storm. However, the old man in front of the dilapidated general's mansion was not an ordinary person. As the most respected great divine priest of light in the West Hill Divine Palace, he still had countless loyal subordinates after being imprisoned for 14 years. Even the hierarch did not dare to kill him. Once he made a move, he caused chaos in the Divine Hall and was the first person in history to successfully escape from the U prison. The nation master of Tang was facing the great divine priest of light. No one knew who would win. The West Hill sent a letter saying that you are very powerful. My senior brother also said that you are very powerful. He even said that you may be more powerful than the hierarch. Looking at the great divine priest of light, Li Qingshan suddenly smiled and said, I know that because my mind is preoccupied with secular affairs, I can't keep my Taoist heart calm, so I always have some regrets in the realm. So if you are really stronger than me, I don't think it is difficult to accept, and I won't think it is a shame. The great divine priest of light said, after so many years of cultivation, if I still can't see through this, I will inevitably be a little stupid. So I can't see through you. Li Qingshan stopped smiling and said, you are different from the two great divine priests of judgment and revelation. Back then, my senior brother and I never saw a trace of ambition for power in you. You didn't even seem to have much interest in the glory of Haotian in the human world. You studied the scriptures hard. You saved people in trouble. You were compassionate but not compassionate. You were indifferent but not interested in indifference. You were almost a completely transparent or bright person. Li Qingshan's voice gradually became cold. He said, so I don't understand why you suddenly became such a person. You would do such a thing and become the first great divine priest of light to be imprisoned in the divine hall. I also don't understand why you still came to Chang'an after escaping. What do you want to do? All things and laws in the world are determined by Haotian. Our position in the world has long been determined. My position is above the divine priest of light. My mission is to see the darkness. That's all. After a short pause, the great divine priest of light looked up at the messy sky behind the messy branches above the courtyard wall. A trace of compassionate smile appeared on his face. He continued to say, if everyone knew their position and mission, everything in the world would be much simpler. When I saw the darkness, it should have been purified by judgment. However, no one was willing to complete their mission, so I had to do more. He withdrew his gaze and looked at Li Qingshan. He said, whether you see it or not, the darkness is always there. But since I saw it, I really can't pretend that I didn't see it. Li Qingshan shook his head and said, if all things and laws in the world are determined by Haotian, then why do we still need to cultivate and seek? Where the darkness is, it will be purified by Haotian. You just need to complete your mission and your position. Why do you still need to do these things? If you could really know your position and mission, you should still be the great divine priest of light sitting on the divine throne and being worshipped by all people. How could you become a stray dog that everyone wants to kill? The great divine priest of light was silent. Li Qingshan looked at his old face and thought of the benevolent old man who painstakingly studied the scriptures in the divine hall many years ago. His heart was filled with mixed feelings of sympathy and disgust. He sighed and said, "All the great divine priests of light are the most intelligent people in Haotian Taoism. But I don't know why the great divine priest of light is the most prone to problems. The more outstanding one is, the more so. The one who preached in the wilderness more than 1,000 years ago, and the one who disappeared in the South Sea 600 years ago. You are also the same. Why? I often wonder if it's because people like you, who have great wisdom and perseverance, have great confidence that you insist that what you see is the truth, and that it's the only truth, so you walk further and further away from the real truth." Listening to these sincere words, the great divine priest of light was silent for a long time. He seemed to have some emotions, but after a moment, his expression became calm and indifferent. He said, "What you see is what you see. What you see in the eyes of light is the objective existence of the world. Falsehood is also the truth." Hearing his words, Li Qingshan could not help but be slightly angry. He said in a low voice, "But no one will think so except you. 14 years ago, you faked the hierarch's edict and let Li Peiyan and Xiahou do this. His Majesty was angry, and so was the hierarch. If you did not want to be the enemy of the whole world, how could the world treat you as its enemy? How could His Majesty and the hierarch think you should die at the same time? You are so virtuous and respected, how could you be locked up for so many years?" The great divine priest of light said, "I did not fake the edict of the chief monk." Li Qingshan slightly raised his eyebrows and said, "You mean the hierarch used you as a scapegoat?" The great divine priest of light's tone became calmer and calmer. He said, "Who has the guts to use me as a scapegoat?" After a moment of silence, Li Qingshan said, "But this thing was done by you after all." "Yes. Have you ever considered the thoughts of His Majesty and the hierarch? What does the thoughts of the Tang Emperor and the chief monk have to do with me?" The great divine priest of light's voice was as calm as the frozen surface of a lake in winter, smooth and without any ripples or traces, as if the disaster he had caused that shocked the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace was just a trivial matter. Li Qingshan looked at him coldly and asked, "You came to Chang'an after getting out of trouble. Have you not let go of that thing?" The great divine priest of light was silent. Li Qingshan turned to look at the dilapidated general's mansion and sighed. "So many innocent people have died in Chang'an, and just because of what you said back then. This general's mansion has deteriorated to this extent thanks to you. Are you still not satisfied?" The great divine priest of light said expressionlessly, "Not satisfied." Li Qingshan pointed at the general's mansion and scolded harshly, "All the people in the general's mansion are dead. What else are you dissatisfied with?" The great divine priest of light shook his head and said, "No, there is still one who is not dead." Li Qingshan's pupils shrank slightly and he was extremely shocked. At that time, both the Divine Hall and the Tang Empire's princes and generals agreed to cooperate with me because no one wanted to see the son of Yama come to the world. However, after that, everyone thought that what I saw was fake. Your princes thought that I had bewitched them and your emperor was extremely angry. So even though some people knew that there was still one person alive in this general's mansion, they were not willing to continue the investigation and even forbade talking about it. Why was I imprisoned for 14 years? Because I knew that the son of Yama was still in this world and was becoming more and more powerful. I wanted to continue looking for him, but those people did not believe in the son of Yama and his existence. If I continued to investigate, there would be a big problem between the West Hill and the Tang Empire. Then some people had to lock me up. He said slowly with a sad mood, "Peach Mountain, the Tang Empire, the whole world has decayed. It is not that I want to be the enemy of the whole world, but the whole world is the companion of the dark night and the enemy of the light. I am the great divine priest of light. I am Wei Guangming. then the whole world is my enemy. I don't want to use the name of chaos in Chang'an anymore. The name of this chapter is more relevant. This is really a big drama. There will be a volume called The Year of the Curtain, which is probably the third last volume. Recently, I have been at home in Hubei, so I can only keep the update like this for the time being. First, the quality is guaranteed, then the quantity is guaranteed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 210. In the previous chapters, I confused the Ming hand scroll with the Ri hand scroll. I will correct it when I get home. Sorry, thank you for reminding me. Who were those people? Who didn't believe in the legend of the son of Yama? Who could change the divine hall's attitude? Who could make the Tang Empire wait quietly? Who could make the great divine priest of light fall into the dust with one word? Li Qingshan's body suddenly stiffened as the image of an old temple on a quiet mountain appeared in his mind. Many years ago, when the West Hill Divine Palace gave him the title of Great Divine Priest, he once went to the old temple. This was the only time in his life, but it was unforgettable. Thinking of this, he seemed to see the thin figure on the edge of the cliff again, and his whole body was slightly cold. The Great Divine Priest of Light said, I don't know what the Abbey Dean was thinking at that time. I respect him from the bottom of my heart, but I will still stick to my own ideas. Li Qingshan looked at his old cheeks in silence. Only then did he know that it was the Taoist in indigo who personally imprisoned him as the Great Divine Priest of Light. Then he thought of the Great Divine Priest of Light who could stick to his own ideas in front of the Taoist in indigo. He could not help but feel great admiration. Because I stick to it, I will not give up. The light in the Great Divine Priest of Light's eyes was calm and deep. He said slowly, during these years of being imprisoned in the back of Peach Mountain, I have never stopped looking at the world with this pair of eyes. 1 year, I even tried it once. Li Qingshan frowned and said, the Yen territory murder case? The Great Divine Priest of Light did not answer directly, but said indifferently, unfortunately, I still failed to kill that person. I clearly saw that the shadow of the night was still floating in the world, sometimes thick and sometimes faint, sometimes disappearing and sometimes appearing. But during these 2 years, the shadow became more and more solid, which means that person is becoming more and more powerful. Li Qingshan asked with a serious expression, who is the person you saw with your eyes? Is he in Chang'an? The Great Divine Priest of Light gave a very obscure answer, the eyes can only see his existence, but not his existence. One day, I saw him appear in Chang'an, so I was very anxious, so I wanted to come to Chang'an. Although he said that he was worried, the expression on the old man's face was still calm, without a hint of anxiety. Li Qingshan was silent for a long time, as if he was thinking about what the headmaster had said. Finally, he shook his head slowly but firmly and said, the legend is just a legend. No one has ever discovered the underworld. The headmaster has been traveling around the world for many years. I heard that the Abbey Dean is also traveling in the south. They must also be looking for the underworld. After so many years, even the two of them have not found the underworld, so it can't be real. If there is no netherworld, there will be no netherworld king. If there is no netherworld king, there will be no son of netherworld king. The Great Divine Priest of Light said, of course there is the underworld, so there is naturally Yama. Li Qingshan stared into his eyes through the winter wind in the alley and asked, where's the underworld? The Great Divine Priest of Light said calmly, I don't know. Li Qingshan asked, then how can you conclude that there is an underworld? The Great Divine Priest of Light replied, because there is, so there is. Li Qingshan suddenly felt like he had returned to the fragrance workshop many years ago, when he met the crown prince who was more shameless than himself. Other than beating him up, there was no way for him to have a normal conversation. The Great Divine Priest of Light looked at his expression and smiled. He said, the Ming hand scroll has records about the underworld invasion and the existence of the acuteness Yama. But 1,000 years ago, the Ming hand scroll was taken to the wilderness by that ancestor and was lost. No one has ever seen it, so it was gradually forgotten and even became a legend. Li Qingshan frowned and said, but you haven't seen the Ming hand scroll either. It's true that I didn't have the opportunity to see the original Ming hand scroll. But don't forget, that ancestor and I are both great divine priests of light. Some records will always be passed down in an indescribable way. Li Qingshan looked at him and shook his head. He sighed and said, Great divine priest, have you ever thought that just because of your own illusion and legend, you gave up everything and became the enemy of the whole world? The great divine priest of light shook his head and said, with a bright Taoist heart, what you see is what you believe. Then you naturally have to believe what you see. As long as you believe, then the illusion is often true. After a moment of silence, Li Qingshan took a step forward. A very light airflow splashed up where his straw sandals landed. It was like a stone falling into a still lake, making circles of ripples. Only Haotian can see everything in the world and see all the truth with one glance. Although you sit on the great divine priest's throne and are under the sky, you are a human, not a god, not even heaven. The great divine priest of light's gaze fell on Li Qingshan's right foot. There was no emotional fluctuation in his voice. He said indifferently, because I am not a god or Haotian, so you don't believe me? Yes. Li Qingshan's right hand that was exposed from his sleeve was extremely delicate. It held nothing and trembled slightly, as if he was clutching a struggling dragon. Meanwhile, the sword in the sheath on his back thrummed like the dragon was about to emerge from its body. Even if you are a god, there is still a god-stunning array in Chang'an. The great divine priest of light shook his head and said, the god-stunning array will not be interested in an old man like me. Li Qingshan took another step forward. The long sword in the sheath roared louder and louder, and the grip of the dragon in his right hand became firmer. He looked at the old face of the great divine priest of light and said in a low voice, I know you will come here to see, so I let the south gate set up a Tianluo array around. I want to see if I can keep you here. No. The great divine priest of light said, even the confinement of judgment can't trap me, let alone the Tianluo array. Li Qingshan said, the Tianluo array is a divine array given by Haotian. Is it not comparable to the confinement of the great divine priest of judgment? The great divine priest of light replied, the confinement traps the heart, while the Tianluo traps the body. It is naturally more difficult for the heart to escape than the body. Li Qingshan was silent for a while and agreed with this judgment. He said, the god-stunning array will not be activated because of you. But if you want to escape, you must display all the aura of your state. At that time, the array will have a way to subdue you. The great divine priest of light said calmly, I am just an ordinary old man in Chang'an. Li Qingshan said, because I am here, you can't always pretend to be an ordinary old man. The great divine priest of light looked at the master of Tang who was slowly approaching him and smiled. He said, Qingshan, you are a person with a great lucky chance. When you were young, you met the emperor of Tang and were respected in the secular world. Then you were chosen by the elder Taoists in the temple. You easily entered the knowing destiny state and were favored by the emperor. However, because of your good lucky chance, you have never experienced the great fear of life and death in your life. So how can you threaten me? Li Qingshan was so despised, but there was no anger on his face. He said with a smile, as I said before, if I am not your opponent, it is also a matter of course. So I never expect to keep you here by myself. The great divine priest of light's deep eye sockets became darker and darker, gradually turning into a pair of pure black gems. He looked at the slightest change of the chi of heaven and earth in the street and sensed the more intense breathing around him. He said indifferently, I've said it before. Your luck is too good, your power is too great, but your experience is too little. When you first became the imperial preceptor, Liu Bai was determined to challenge you, but he was stopped by Yen Sei. You've never fought against a supreme expert in your life, so you can't understand. For people like you and me, the number of enemies doesn't mean much, unless the number is so large that it can make the ground of the mortal world sink. As soon as he finished speaking, the withered leaves above the street fluttered again, and dozens of crossbowmen appeared in the streets and alleys. The sharp crossbows in their hands reflected the biting coldness, and the tightened crossbows clearly emitted the hidden powerful force. The cultivation powerhouses of the Imperial Center administration in brown official robes also gradually came over. In some rooms in the further marketplace, the array tactical master of the Tang Empire responsible for launching the encircling formation was constantly pouring psyche power into the formation eye. The hoofbeats sounded like thunder. The heavy armored black cavalry of the Tang Empire began to gather here at high speed. The huge weight made the ground of the long street tremble violently, as if it would sink at any time. Li Qingshan withdrew his eyes from the mottled wall of the general's mansion and looked at the divine priest of light expressionlessly. He said, "Although you are the divine priest, your body is still that of a mortal. You are so fragile. Today, I will let you die in front of the general's mansion. It is also to find some overdue light for the innocent people who died in the general's mansion." The great divine priest of light said, "I am the light." Li Qingshan said sarcastically, "I didn't expect that after being imprisoned for 14 years, you have become so conceited." The great divine priest of light replied calmly, "What you said makes sense. Conceit is against the law of the church. My expression is more accurate. I should say, since the headmaster of academy is not in Chang'an, then I am the light." Li Qingshan was silent. Stepping into the street with the momentum of a dragon and a tiger, he, the master of Tang Nation, exchanged words with the great divine priest of light. The content was shocking, but the tone was calm, as if they were having a tea contest. All the killing and stubbornness were hidden in the picking of the spoon. What they tested was the Taoist heart, and what they competed was still the Taoist heart. After this conversation, it seemed that there was no winner or loser, but it could also be said that the great divine priest of light had won, so there was no need to talk anymore. The strong sound of the spring sounded, and the sharp crossbow arrows shot out like a dense rainstorm. The sound of the arrows tearing the air was so sharp that it hurt people's ears. They surrounded the body of the great divine priest of light from all directions, leaving no gap. Almost at the same time, the array tactical master of Tang hidden in the distant marketplace started the encircling array. On the street outside the general's mansion, the qi of heaven and earth changed dramatically. Countless qi turbulence turned into a primordial qi lock, forcibly locking all the space around the great divine priest of light. With a clear dragon's roar, the sword on Li Qingshan's back thrummed and vibrated. The sheath flew out like a bolt of lightning, turning into an azure dragon in the air and crossing half the street in a single moment. The dragon's roar rang out as it slammed into the divine body of Light's old face. This was a long-planned attack by the Tang Empire. Because the target was the horrible great divine priest of light, they were well prepared. In addition to these powerful attacks in the street, there were many follow-up arrangements. And the opponent's response was very simple. Facing the rain of arrows, the encircling formation that locked the world, and the flying sword that had transformed into an azure dragon, the old man's deep and serene eyes emitted a straight ray of light, then a second ray, a third ray, 1,000 rays, 10,000 rays, countless rays. The great divine priest of light shone brightly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 211. The thick winter clouds over Chang'an city blocked the sun behind it. However, a sun suddenly appeared in the streets outside the general's mansion in the southern city. The blazing light burst into the eyes of the great divine priest of light and instantly illuminated the dark world. The withered leaves, mottled walls, broken stone lions, and old steps were all covered with a layer of dazzling halo. It completely lost its original appearance and became incomparably holy. Dozens of elite crossbowmen, known for their perseverance, threw away the crossbows in their hands and covered their eyes. They screamed and fell to the ground. The flying crossbow arrows screamed even more miserably. They had already lost their direction in the blazing light. Faintly, the quivering crossbow tails could be seen everywhere on the trees and walls. The black-armored soldiers of the Tang Empire gathered on the street were in chaos. The well-trained warhorses seemed to have sensed the supreme power contained in the blazing white curtain of light in the alley. They neighed and bent their front hooves respectfully, kneeling on the ground in fear. God knows how many cavalrymen were knocked off their feet. The South School of Haotian Taoism array tactical masters hiding in the distant marketplace were even paler. Several people's clothes were covered with blood. They did not suffer from any backfire of the chi of heaven and earth. But because of the great confusion and fear in their sense of perception, the spiritual impact directly hurt their internal organs. The exquisite encircling array tactical array inherited from the West Hill Divine Palace could not locate the target. They cultivated Haotian Taoism and poured the power of light into the encircling array tactical master. But the great divine priest of light was full of light from his body to his heart, without any impurities. It was impossible to lock a pool of clear water with crystal clear lake water. Further away on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, a breeze blew out of nowhere. The gravel on the Vermilion Bird engraved deeply in the stone slabs was blown everywhere by the wind. Tourists from various counties of the empire were blinded by the wind and blown by the gravel. They subconsciously lowered their heads to avoid it or rubbed their eyes with their hands. Even if they did not lower their heads or cover their eyes, they probably could not see that a very clear and faint shadow of the Vermilion Bird, almost invisible to the naked eye, rose from the stone carvings on the ground. It flapped its wings and rolled up the fallen leaves and gravel. In an instant, it flew around Chang and at an unimaginably terrifying speed. Unfortunately, the Vermilion Bird did not find any enemies in Chang'an. An angry roar came from the highest winter cloud. Li Qingshan stood at the front of the alleyway outside the general's estate silently. As he listened to the indignant cry from the cloud, he slowly opened his eyes and looked at the empty alleyway. His expression became even more stern. The azure dragon that was wandering in the alley let out a low, unwilling roar. It slowly withdrew its aura and returned to its scabbard. The Vermilion Bird failed to find any trace of that person, nor did all the spies scattered in Chang'an. The countless backup plans that the Tang Empire had set up were forced to an abrupt halt. The thick winter clouds above Chang'an suddenly dispersed, revealing the long-awaited sun. The warm sunlight gently sprinkled down and shone on the thousands of mansions in the human world. It was everywhere. That person did not make a move, nor did he reveal the slightest hostility or battle intent. He only emitted his light will, and like the rays of the sun, it quietly faded away, leaving no trace. There is light everywhere in the world. How can you find light? Li Qingshan looked up at the light leaking through the winter clouds and murmured, above the god's throne, under the sky, "Senior brother, I finally understand what you mean by that." In the small courtyard behind the House of Red Sleeves, Master Yen Sei stared at the swaying candlestick on the table. His wrinkled eyes trembled slightly, as if he was thinking about a very important decision. Dewdrop reclined in his arms. Her slender eyelashes trembled slightly, and her face was full of confusion. However, she did not dare to ask when she saw the solemn expression of the old Taoist. Why did he light the candlestick in the daytime? Could it be that, this divine talisman master, whom no one in the empire dared to offend, actually had some strange interests after he refused to really drink water these days? Looking at the candle tears gradually accumulating on the candlestick, Dewdrop's body was a little stiff. She thought that she had heard a lot of such interests, but she had never done it herself. She did not know whether the candle tears would hurt when falling on her body, or it was really interesting. She wanted to refuse, but she did not dare to say it out. Suddenly, the candlestick on the table suddenly shone brightly, illuminating the room. Dewdrop was startled and almost fell down from Yen Sei's legs. Master Yen Sei stared at the burning candlestick and narrowed his eyes for a long time. Then he rubbed Dewdrop's plump and tender buttocks lovingly, and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "In the future, I have something to do, so I probably will not come here often. If there is something that your Miss Jian can't solve in the future, you can go to the south gate to find my junior brother." Now Dewdrop already knew the real identity of this old Taoist, and naturally knew that the junior brother he mentioned was Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang. Suddenly hearing these words, she understood that she had found another extremely thick mountain in the future. She could not help but feel a little surprised, but then she felt infinite fear. She thought that why did these words sound a bit like that he was making arrangements for his death. There was no true love on the pleasure ground, not to mention the age and status gap between Yen Sei and Dewdrop was too big. However, somehow, when Dewdrop looked at the wretched face of the old Taoist, she actually saw some sadness and reluctance. She subconsciously reached out to grasp the collar of the old Taoist's Taoist robe, completely forgetting that she usually hated the oil stains and dirt on this Taoist robe. An old man wearing a thick cotton-padded jacket full of dirt, with his hands clasped behind his stooped body, walked slowly in the streets of the eastern city. The cotton-padded jacket still gave off a very faint smell of hot and sour noodle slice soup. As previously said in the conversation with Li Qingshan outside the general's mansion, as long as the headmaster of academy was not in Chang'an, he was the light, and the only thing he was afraid of was the big tactical array of Chang'an. However, he was not evil. He had a kind heart, and his Taoist heart was pure and bright. Even if what he did was unpardonable in the eyes of the whole world, he still believed that he was the light. As long as the big tactical array of Chang'an was not fully activated, how could the vermilion bird divine talisman which arose from the light find him? However, people who had cultivated to this state, even if they could not understand the deepest law of the flow of the qi of heaven and earth in the world, they had begun to have some kind of connection between man and nature, and could vaguely know what would appear in front of the river of time. The old man felt that he would die in Chang'an, and this feeling was getting stronger and stronger. He seemed to have seen the messengers of the underworld begin to dig a grave for him in Chang'an, but he did not know what would be written on the tombstone. The end of life was not necessarily a sad thing. However, just like Yen Sei had a nostalgia for the human world, he also had some regrets about it. Years ago, he had one foot over the threshold and saw the wonderful world over there, but was ruthlessly taken back by some existence. He was not reconciled to it, so he wanted to accept a successor before he left this world, and leave his mantle, so that his successor could clearly see the world in the future on his behalf. It was difficult for a divine talisman master to have a real successor, and it was also difficult for the great divine priest of light to have a real successor. Yen Sei now had Ning Kei, so he had no regrets, but he did not. He even thought that he would not have won until the end of his life, until he came to Chang'an, came to Lin 47th Street and saw Sang Sang. The old man stood outside the threshold of the old brush pen shop, looking at the little handmaiden who was busy in the shop. He was full of admiration, joy, and satisfaction, and even moved to tears. He felt that although he had repeatedly disobeyed the will of Haotian in this life, at least in the last stage of his life, Haotian still mercifully gave him the most precious gift. There was no one in the world more suitable to be the successor of the great divine priest of light than this little girl, because there could not be a second person in this world who was cleaner than her, without a trace of impurity. The old man crossed the threshold and walked into the old brush pen shop. He bowed to the busy little girl and said, "Hello." Sang Sang turned around, put the big rag in her hand on the table, and answered, "Hello." These days, she had long noticed that this pitiful and lonely old man often appeared in the alley. Third Master Chi's subordinates had even asked her if she wanted to drive this old man away. However, she thought that he was just an ordinary strange old man, so she rejected the suggestion. She was even too lazy to pay more attention to him. The old man asked, "Do you know the biggest difference between human beings and beasts?" Sang Sang did not think, directly shook her head and answered, "I don't know." Then she grabbed the rag and was ready to continue wiping the table. The old man sincerely said, can you try to think about it? Sang Sang thought for a while this time and said, human beings are more beasts than beasts, so we are stronger than beasts, so we can eat beasts. Hearing this answer, the old man was obviously not mentally prepared, and asked in surprise, why do you think so? Sang Sang shook her head and said, I said I don't know. This is what young master told me when I was young. The old man sighed and said, your young master is also a wonderful person, either a great evil or a great good person. Sang Sang thought for a while and said, young master is young master. She did not finish her words, and she did not have the habit of finishing her words. If the old man could understand, then so be it. If not, then it was none of her business. In fact, her meaning was very clear. A son was a son, a mother was a mother, a brother was a brother, a husband was a husband, and a young master was a young master. For her, Ning Ke was a separate existence, different from the definition of evil, good, man, woman, rich, and poor. After a moment of silence, the old man said, in my opinion, the biggest difference between human beings and beasts is inheritance. Beasts do not hesitate to pass on their own life and death, but human beings want to pass on their spirit. The similarity is that this kind of inheritance contains a very strong desire, and they both want to leave a trace of themselves in the world for a longer time. After a short pause, the old man looked at the little girl's slightly dark cheeks, and said solemnly, if the inheritance represents the root of an aristocratic family or the orthodoxy, then this strong desire will even become some kind of heavy responsibility. Finally, the old man concluded, this is the so-called future. Sang Sang opened her bright willow-shaped eyes and looked at the strange old man in front of her. After thinking for a long time, she thought she understood, and asked seriously, do you want to find a wife and have children? She looked up and down at the old man, judging his age, and said, if you are sure that you can still have children, there are Yen girls in the eastern city Rinyatsi. The price is not expensive, and they are easy to give birth to. The old man was in a trance and said, I didn't mean that. Sang Sang was stunned for a while, and then she shook her head shyly and said, I can't give birth to children for others. I am sure that this is the first time that I have fallen in love with the character I wrote, and it is only second to my love for my mother and my leader. I wish my leader a happy birthday. Besides, tomorrow is Saturday, and I have to rest. I am really lazy, cheap, and shameless. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 212. After a while, Sang Sang looked at the old man and said seriously, if you only like domestic women and not Yen women, I know some girls from brothels. But it will cost a lot if you want them to bear children for you. The old man was in a trance again. After a long silence, he finally woke up and said seriously, I don't want to find a wife to bear children. I want to find a disciple to inherit my mantle. It was Sang Sang's turn to be in a trance. She thought, what does finding a disciple have to do with me? My bones are not unique, and my background is not strange. Although your cotton-padded jacket is indeed dirty, it seems that you have not begged these days. No matter how I look at it, you don't look like an otherworldly sublime being in the stories I heard from Ning Ke when I was young. Do you want me to be your disciple, or do you want me to find you a disciple? She asked seriously. The old man answered seriously, I want you to be my disciple. Sang Sang decided to ignore him. She squatted down and began to wipe the table legs. The old man looked at the bright table leg, which was absolutely free of any stains, and remained silent. The old man didn't leave the old brush pen shop. He followed Sang Sang and watched her. He watched as Sang Sang wiped the tables and chairs, cleaned the non-existent dust, and repaired the door that had been repaired long ago. He watched as Sang Sang closed the door, fetched water from the well, washed the rice, prepared the vegetables, cooked the rice, and chopped the garlic. He watched as Sang Sang sat at the table and began to eat alone. Sang Sang didn't invite him to eat with her. Strangely, she didn't ask him to leave either. The old man looked at her through the window and said sympathetically, "Are you bored?" Sung Sung's hand holding the bowl slightly stiffened. She looked at the 3 vegetables on the white rice and nodded. Then she continued to chew the vegetables in her mouth, and her dark cheeks bulged slightly. After dinner, Sang Sang washed the dishes, face, and feet and prepared to sleep. Before going to bed, she took out a quilt and handed it to the old man who had been guarding in the courtyard. She said, "If there is no place to sleep, you can put the table together in front and sleep for the night." The old man felt the weight of the quilt and became more determined. He looked at the little girl and asked seriously, "Do you believe in lucky chance?" Sang Sang shook her head. Then she thought of their encounter many years ago and the life they had together. Her willowy eyes brightened and she nodded again. "I believe in fate." The old man said, "I believe that everyone is destined to meet some people and do some things. These things arranged by Haotian are fated chances." The old man's cloudy eyes gradually brightened. He looked at the night view of Chang and outside the small courtyard and said after a moment of silence, "Many years ago, I saw the shadow of nightfall in this city. Once I saw it, it was like meeting. Since we've met, we can't be separated anymore. It's just that what I've seen isn't real, and what I've met isn't concrete. I only know that he exists, but I don't know where he is." Then, I saw a man in Chang, and who was born with knowledge. I felt that this was wrong, because there should not be anyone in the world who was born with knowledge. So, my lucky chance with him began. My destiny with him is to see him and then kill him. After seeing him for 9 months, I tried to kill him, but I knew that I didn't kill him because he was still alive. I was the only person in the world who could clearly feel that he was still alive. It's just that since then, the opportunity has faded. Apart from the occasional time, I've never been able to see where he is. Until recently, I saw him again, so I came to find him and renew my lucky chance. The old man muttered the past like a devout, foolish woman sitting on the high threshold. Sang Sang listened in silence for a long time. Her willowy eyes occasionally brightened and then disappeared. Then, she asked, "Find him. What will you do?" The old man said, "Kill him." Sang Sang asked, "If you're such a great person, why didn't you kill him back then?" "Because the lucky chance between us is not absolute. Not everyone can easily enter this city to kill people, especially me. So, only the people in this city could do it back then. More importantly, the whole world was skeptical of what I saw. They didn't believe me at all." The old man continued, "I don't know what will happen after I find him. Ordinary people like us can never predict Haotian's arrangements. But I always believe that he is a person who has a great lucky chance with me. I thought that I came to Chang and to understand this lucky chance, until I met you." The old man looked at Sang Sang's slightly dark cheeks and bright willowy eyes. He was silent for a long time. He silently thought about the true reason why so many loyal subordinates sacrificed themselves, which made the whole Peach Mountain and the Tang Empire feel uneasy and attracted him to Chang'an. Was it the dark shadow or the person in front of him? Sang Sang's eyelashes drooped slightly and asked calmly, "What can I learn from you?" The old man looked at her slightly fluttering eyelashes and ordinary face. He said, "Divine skill." Sang Sang asked, "Is divine skill very powerful?" The old man nodded and said, "Very powerful." Sang Sang lowered her head even more, which made her eyelashes look longer. She whispered, "My young master is very powerful. After I learn divine skill, can I help him beat people?" The old man smiled and said, "Of course you can." Sang Sang raised her head and looked at the old man attentively with her slightly dark face. She asked bravely, "Can I defeat you?" The old man looked at the little girl's little face. He looked at the pair of eyes that were like clear spring water between the slightly black mountain rocks. It was as if he wanted to see into the deepest part of the clear spring water. He still did not see a trace of impurity, just transparent, absolutely transparent. He could not help but let out a sigh from the depths of his heart. He said in a solemn tone as if he was prophesying, "Definitely." Sang Sang asked, "What is divine skill?" The old man replied, "Cultivation is about perceiving and then controlling the aura between heaven and earth. Divine skill is about perceiving and controlling the divine light of Haotian. The so-called divine light, you have seen it since you were born. You have seen it when you wake up in the morning. You have seen it when you close your door at dusk. You have seen it in summer. You have seen it in winter. You have seen it all the time." Sang Sang slightly frowned and asked, "What is that?" The night in Chang'an was quiet. The sky was filled with stars, but it was not as bright as the day. The old man stood in the cramped courtyard and slowly spread his arms, as if he wanted to bear all the light in the world. Haotian's divine light is the sunlight. As soon as he finished speaking, the tip of the middle finger of the old man's right hand that was sticking out of the sleeve of his dirty cotton jacket suddenly became bright. It was unknown where the luster came from, but it was slowly released from the inside out. It was like a flower of light, covering all the lines on his fingertips. It was holy and milky white, causing people to feel respect in their hearts. The old man looked at the little girl in front of him and said calmly, "To perceive Haotian's divine light, even if it takes 10 years, it will not be too long. Therefore, what you need at the beginning is great forbearance and patience." Hearing this, Sang Sang seemed to be thinking. She raised her right index finger and put her slender finger into the dark winter night. The slightly dark finger gently swayed in the wind, and then produced a dim light, like a candle in the wind, which could be extinguished at any time. However, it was still lit and did not go out. The old man looked at the light at the tip of her slender index finger, as if he was drunk and did not want to wake up. In the winter of the 14th year of the Tianqi era, the great divine priest of light who escaped from the West Hill Divine Palace came to Chang, and because of a feeling. He did not find the shadow of the dark night, but he found his successor. This was probably some kind of Tianqi. Somewhere on the grassland not far from the city of Wei in the northwest border of the Tang Empire. Under a dying winter tree, a scholar in a cotton-padded jacket was cooking. He calmly and attentively looked at the scroll in his left hand. Suddenly, he thought of something and took a ladle of water from his waist. He poured it into the milky white soup pot and slightly suppressed the boiling in the pot. Taking advantage of the time he had won, he began to slowly cut the meat. The perfectly frozen mutton danced under the sharp knife like snowflakes. However, his movements were too slow. Before he could finish cutting the meat, the soup pot boiled again. Another ladle of water was poured into the soup pot, and the scholar continued to cut the meat. The tall headmaster of the academy held a bowl and chopsticks that had already been mixed. He waited by the soup pot and sighed anxiously from time to time. When it comes to fate and lucky chance, no one knows what they will see or encounter. No one knows what it means to them. Ideas and reality are often two opposite worlds. For example, the general and the woman we saw in the city of Wei a few days ago. Maybe they will live forever, or maybe they will return to the Central Plains next year. But no matter what happens, they may not be as happy as they seem. The headmaster of the academy tapped the empty bowl with his chopsticks and shook his head. He sighed and said, "Not happy doesn't mean it will be gloomy. I don't think it's a kind of sadness. Instead, I think it's full of comedy. For example, the soup and mutton are here, but I haven't eaten it for an hour. It doesn't mean I will always be sad. Maybe the first bite of mutton will be the best thing I have ever eaten in my life." Any student must learn to hear the teacher's true intentions from his dignified words. As the eldest brother of the academy, of course, the scholar could best understand the headmaster's likes and dislikes. Therefore, he put the scroll back to his waist and began to cut the meat faster, in case the teacher would really get mad later. However, as Chen Pippi had once told Ning Kai, eldest brother was very serious in his work. That was why he did things very slowly. Even though the headmaster of the academy was waiting beside the soup pot with bowls and chopsticks like a beggar, which gave him unprecedented pressure, his speed of cutting meat did not improve much. In order to distract the teacher and relieve the current mental pressure, the eldest brother asked while cutting the meat, "Teacher, can't you see the future?" Hearing this question, the headmaster of the academy was furious. He pointed to the gray winter sky and shouted, "I can't even see the sky, how can I see the future?" Carrot carrot, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 213. The headmaster put down his fingers and looked at the boiling soup pot and the slices of meat on the chopping board that looked like snow. He said bitterly, "If I knew everything, why would I live like a stray dog?" Eldest brother cut the delicious mutton and thought to himself with a smile, "Teacher, when have you ever been afraid?" The headmaster put the bowl and chopsticks on the chopping board and rolled up his sleeves. He easily grabbed the sharp kitchen knife from eldest brother's hand. With a few swishing sounds, the mutton slices flew and piled up into a snowy mountain. The mutton was cooked in the boiling soup. The headmaster happily grabbed the food with his chopsticks and ate to his heart's content. The soup dripped down his beard. He did not even think of letting his most beloved disciple, the old yellow bull, who was eating grass on the meadow, roll its eyes at him and mooed discontentedly. Eldest brother smiled and shook his head at his teacher's happy expression. He wiped his hands clean and walked slowly to the withered winter tree. Looking at the blue lake not far below the meadow and the looming horse gang on the other side of the lake, he slowly raised his eyebrows and asked thoughtfully, "Teacher, is this the Shubby Lake of youngest brother?" As time passed, some things that he didn't know would be known by some means. For example, the one who entered the back mountain of the academy was not Prince Long Ching, but a little guy named Ning Quebec. The headmaster filled a bowl of mutton soup and drank it slowly. His slender eyebrows and tail seemed to be dancing in the winter wind. He looked at the nearby lake and somewhere further away and said, "He grew up in the city of Wei and became an adult in Shubby Lake." Eldest brother nodded and looked back at the headmaster. He asked, "Teacher, why are we coming to the city of Wei?" The headmaster held the soup bowl and looked at the horse gang who were busy making a living by the Shubby Lake. He said, "After all, he is my student. Although we haven't met, it's on the way. Let's consider it a home visit." Eldest brother thought of the scene before he left the academy in Cheng and last spring. He thought of the headmaster's words and the big black umbrella on the lad's back. He asked, "Teacher, did you know that youngest brother would become youngest brother?" The headmaster put down the soup bowl and sighed with satisfaction while touching his slightly bulging belly. He shook his head and said, "There is no such thing as fate in the world. In this case, how can I predict it? Haotian can't arrange everything." The headmaster looked up at the clear sky of the grassland and seemed to see the trembling little boy holding a chopper in the woodshed more than a decade ago. He said with emotion, "Many years ago, I saw your youngest brother. At that time, I just felt that he looked like an old friend. I didn't expect that he would survive and come to me." Eldest brother looked at the grassland and said with some concern, "I don't know if youngest brother can handle going into the wilderness alone." The headmaster said, "That is a difficult child. The wilderness is his home, so he won't be too embarrassed." "If he is really embarrassed, aren't you his senior brother?" Eldest senior brother smiled and lowered his head, as gentle as the spring breeze. The shrill sound of arrows piercing through the air was like the shrill sound of a flute, instantly tearing apart the twilight above the camp. Because the distance was too far, when the arrow flew out of the camp, it was already crooked and slowed down. Like a drunken man, it fell to the ground in a sorry state. It didn't cause any damage, but everyone in the camp knew that the other party's whistling arrow was meant to warn or show off, so they didn't feel relaxed. The smoke and dust in the distance of the grassland gradually dispersed, revealing more than 100 horsemen. Vaguely, the barbarians wrapped in animal hide and cotton armor on the horses' backs were mighty and majestic. They held the reins with one hand and screamed crazily, as if they had seen a large number of prey. The Yen Kingdom's cavalry in the camp split up to meet them. When they were a few arrows away, the grassland barbarians whistled and dispersed. They circled around the flat plains and shallow waters around the camp. They refused to approach, but also had no intention of leaving. Ning Ke was the first to find the traces of the horse gang. After giving a warning, he jumped off the carriage and silently led the big black horse, ready to mount the saddle at any time. However, looking at the grassland barbarians whistling and wandering around, he gradually frowned. In the winter grassland, it was already a large group of horse gang that could gather more than 100 elite horsemen. He didn't know when they started to target the grain delivery team, so he subconsciously looked to his side. The young boys and girls of Black Ink Garden had lived in the Great River Kingdom in the far south for a long time. They had only heard about the ferocity and terror of the Northern Horse Gang in legends. This was the first time in their lives that they had to face these grassland horse gang. However, all the disciples of Black Ink Garden, including Cat Girl, were silent and occasionally nervous, but absolutely not flustered. Each of them held a long handle of a thin knife in their hands and vigilantly waited for the battle to come. At this moment, 3 horsemen galloped out from the north of the camp. They scattered at high speed under the last red flame twilight. Nominally, the disciples of Black Ink Garden of Great River Kingdom were responsible for the grain delivery to the left king's palace in the grassland. However, the Yen Kingdom's cavalry, who were responsible for the safety of the grain team, didn't really obey the order. They were aloof from each other and disliked each other. However, looking at the 3 horsemen galloping out, Zhuo Zhihua couldn't help but praise them. The Yen Kingdom's general's reaction speed is not slow to decide to send a messenger to the palace in the first place. Hearing this, Ning Ke shook his head and led the big black horse to her side. He said, "These barbarians who look like horse gang might be the cavalry of the left king's palace." Zhuo Zhihua and the girls beside the carriage were shocked and they heard this. Ning Ke didn't explain. He looked at the grassland horse gang wandering in the wilderness and the Yen Kingdom's cavalrymen galloping out like 3 arrows. He said, "If we were at the frontier fortress of the Yen territory in the south, there might be a chance to send a messenger. But now that we are deep in the grassland, it is impossible for these 3 cavalrymen to escape." After defeating the Yueluan Kingdom monk by the Jade Waste Lake and living together for the past few days, the girls of Great River Kingdom trusted Ning Ke more and more. They subconsciously believed in his judgment. Cat Girl jumped on the carriage in shock and looked at the 3 Yen cavalrymen who were getting farther and farther away. Her face was full of worry. The Yen Kingdom's general's reaction speed was not slow. But it was precisely because of this that Ning Ke could no longer change the fate of the 3 Yen cavalrymen. Moreover, he was just an ordinary disciple of Black Ink Garden of Great River Kingdom. The sun was sinking lower and lower. The light on the grassland was getting dimmer and the twilight was getting thicker. The 3 Yen cavalrymen were like tiny silhouettes in front of a blood-red canvas. The 3 cavalrymen were either shot by arrows or stopped by the horse ropes. They fell to the ground and there was no more movement. After a while, dozens of grassland horse gang came from the same direction. The corpses of the 3 Yen cavalrymen were dragged by ropes behind the horses. From time to time, the corpses would bump into the soil on the ground. The scene was bloody and the scene was horrible. The 2 groups of grassland horse gang gathered together and let out a burst of arrogant laughter. The so-called clamor was nothing more than this. Ning Ke had seen such scenes on the grassland many times. Back then, he had also dragged the corpse of the leader of the horse gang by the Shubi Lake for a week as a demonstration. Therefore, he was not moved. But for the young girls and the civilians in the grain transport team, such a tragic scene would definitely make them have nightmares every night. They could faintly hear the sound of breathing around them becoming rapid and panicky. As for the 200 Yen cavalrymen, they were in an uproar when they saw their comrades being killed and humiliated. They only managed to calm down under the strong suppression of their commanding officer. No one was a match for these barbarians on the grassland, at least before the desolate man moved south. The previous scene was proof. Therefore, even though the Yen army had the advantage in numbers and had the disciples of Black Ink Garden as the main fighting force, they could only suppress their anger and fear. They used the grain transport team to set up a simple formation and used the fastest speed to set up a defensive attack, waiting for the grassland horse gang to attack. The atmosphere in the camp became unusually tense. It was the same after the dozens of Yen cavalrymen returned to the camp. This was because even if they had not seen it with their own eyes, they had heard of the savagery of the grassland horse gang. Especially the civilians in the grain transport team, their faces were ashen and their bodies were trembling. They could not even complete the simplest transportation work. Unexpectedly, the grassland horse gang did not take advantage of the last light and the good opportunity to attack when the people in the camp were distracted. Instead, they held the reins and stopped a few arrows away, watching the people in the camp coldly. Among them, the 3 leaders of the horse gang were waving their horse whips and pointing, looking extremely arrogant. As night fell, a bonfire was lit in the camp. The generals of the Yen army personally set up surveillance posts. The soldiers looked nervously at the pitch-black periphery of the grassland, facing the imminent danger. Almost no one could sleep peacefully, thinking that once they fell asleep, they would not wake up again. They were worried that the horse gang would attack at night. Ning Ke knew the behavior of the horse gang very well. Whether it was the real horse gang or the palace cavalry disguised as horse gang, once they got on a horse and became a thief, they would firmly follow the behavior of the horse gang. The horse gang would not choose to attack at night. He set up his small tent beside the horse carriage and prepared to have a good sleep in preparation for the bloody battle the next morning. A gust of night wind blew, lifting the tent and the curtain of the horse carriage. His pupils shrank because he found that there was no one in the horse carriage. He did not know where the girl in white, Mo Shanshan, had gone. He quietly climbed to the top of the horse carriage and looked at the periphery of the camp with the help of the extremely dim starlight. There was a circle of burning bonfire, and on the other side of the flame, he could vaguely see a thin figure. On this piece of the winter plains, except for him, who had extremely sharp eyes, probably no one could see the thin figure. Under the illumination of the fire and starlight, the thin figure's white robe seemed even thinner, as if it would float away with a blow of the night wind. It was like a ghost or a spirit, and no one knew what it was doing. Ning Ke looked at it silently, deep in thought. Then he jumped off the horse carriage and fell asleep with his clothes on. When the night was at its darkest, several shrill screams suddenly sounded from the southwest of the camp, as well as the wild howls of the horses. The Yen cavalry, who had been vigilant in the north, was startled and looked in that direction. Ning Ke, who was in the tent beside the horse carriage, had woken up. He put his ear to the ground and listened for a while. Through the gap of the curtain, he saw the girl's figure cut out by the candlelight in the horse carriage. It gradually became brighter. He smiled and then closed his eyes, continuing to sleep peacefully. In his dream, he wondered when he could write such a powerful fire talisman. Happy face, I wish everyone a happy lantern festival and a prosperous life. Just like this talisman, it smells so good. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.